The river was
Take my hand,
swallowing
kid.
her
I've got you.
alive.
Okay, but
200
who are
pounds
you?
of dead
A
weight
friend.
trapped
Now
behind a
move!
jammed door, lungs filling with black water that tasted like rust and gasoline, and the certainty absolute unshakable that this was how it ended. Not in a knife fight, not on a highway at 100 miles an hour, not in the 100 different ways Shay Colton had imagined dying over 24 years of riding with men and women who lived on the razor's edge of everything. No, she was going to die in 3 feet of dirty river water while strangers stood on the bank above her and filmed it for social media. The irony would have made her laugh if she'd had any air left. The impact had been brutal. One moment she'd been gripping the steering wheel of her Silverado knuckles bone white, her mind still turning over the meeting that had ended 3 hours earlier. The words, the threats, the cold smile of a man who trafficked children and expected her to help him do it. The next moment, headlights had flooded her peripheral vision. No warning, no brake lights, just a black SUV cutting into her lane with the kind of surgical precision that spoke of intention, not accident. She jerked the wheel instinctively, muscle memory from 24 years of riding. But a car isn't a bike. A car doesn't lean into the turn. A car doesn't forgive you when you overcorrect at 60 miles an hour on a rain-slick highway. A car just slides. The guardrail had given way like it was made of cardboard. 1 second of resistance, a brief grinding shriek of metal against metal, and then nothing, just empty air and the stomach-dropping sensation of falling, and Shay Colton thinking with the strange clarity that comes when death reaches for you that she should have seen this coming. The Silverado hit the water nose first. The windshield exploded inward, sending 1,000 fragments of glass into the darkness like shrapnel. 4,000 pounds of river forced its way through every gap, every seal, every weakness in the frame. It came fast and cold and absolute, the way water always comes without mercy, without negotiation, without any interest whatsoever in who you are or what you've survived. Her head snapped forward on impact. Something warm trickled down her temple, cutting a line through the cold. Pain burst behind her eyes, sharp, immediate, the kind that whites out your vision for a half second and leaves you disoriented, grasping for purchase in a world that has suddenly tilted sideways. She reached for the door handle, pulled. Nothing. The frame had crumpled on impact. The guardrail, or what was left of it, had folded into the driver's side door, wedging it shut with the finality of a coffin lid. She pulled harder, throwing every pound of her weight into the effort. The metal groaned but didn't give. The water was climbing her legs now, cold beyond anything she'd ever felt. Cold that stole the breath right out of your chest and replaced it with a tight, suffocating panic that started in your gut and worked its way up into your throat. Her boots filled first the leather, going heavy and useless, then her jeans, the denim clinging to her skin like wet concrete. The water reached her waist, her chest, her shoulders. Each inch was a countdown. Each second was a door closing. Above her, distorted and wavering through the murky water that climbed toward the roof of the cab, she could see lights. Headlights. The blue-white glow of cell phone screens. Shapes moving along the riverbank, people gathering, pointing, talking, doing everything except the one thing that mattered. Nobody was coming. Shay Colton, president of the Hellsangels Florida chapter for 8 years, leader of 150 men and women who would ride through fire if she asked them to, was going to die alone while strangers watched and did nothing. She'd faced down rival clubs. She'd stared into the eyes of men twice her size who thought a woman had no business running anything, let alone a motorcycle club, and she'd made them understand exactly how wrong they were. She'd survived knife fights and broken bones and betrayals that would have destroyed weaker people. But water doesn't care about your reputation. Water doesn't respect your record. Water doesn't negotiate. Water just takes. Her vision started to blur. Bubbles tore past her face, rising toward a surface she could no longer reach. Each breath burned not with fire, but with the wet, choking weight of something filling spaces that were meant for air. She thought about her father, wondered if this was how he'd felt at the end, helpless, broken, alone in a way that no amount of people watching could fix. The water reached her chin, her mouth, her eyes. And Shay Colton, who had never backed down from anything in her 44 years of living, felt the fight drain out of her body like blood from an open wound. Somewhere above the surface, voices blurred together into a meaningless hum. Someone shouted something. Someone else pulled out a phone, the glow hovering along the riverbank like a firefly that couldn't find its way home. But nobody stepped forward. The current was too strong, the night too cold, the risk too real. There was a calculation happening in every head on that bank, the quick, unconscious math that decent people do when danger is close but not quite close enough to make doing nothing feel impossible. They all reached the same answer. Not my problem, not my fight, not worth the risk. What those people didn't know, what Shay herself didn't know, as the darkness closed in around her like a fist, was that someone was watching who didn't think about risk the same way they did. Someone who had nothing left to lose. Someone who had been asleep beneath the bridge 300 yards upstream when the sound of twisting metal and shattering glass tore through the night like a scream. Ren Avery woke the way she always did. Instantly. Completely. Ready to run. You learn that fast when you live outside. Sleep is never deep, never safe, never the warm cocoon it used to be when you had four walls and a door that locked and parents who checked on you before bed. Every sound could be a threat. Every footstep could be someone coming to hurt you, rob you, move you along, or worse. Sleep on the street and you learn to keep one eye open even when both are closed. You learn to catalog sounds the way other people catalog songs, by what they mean, by what they promise, by what they threaten. She was 18 years old and she'd been homeless for 8 months. 243 days if she was counting. She was always counting. The cardboard shelter she'd built beneath the I-275 bridge wasn't much. Flattened boxes wedged between concrete support pillars, arranged with the kind of architectural precision that comes from trial and error and cold nights when the wind found every gap. A blue tarp stolen from a construction site held down with rocks she'd carried from the riverbank one at a time. A sleeping bag she'd found in a dumpster behind a sporting goods store, the zipper broken, the insulation compressed in patches, but still warm enough on most nights to keep her alive. That was all it needed to do. Keep her alive. Keep her hidden from the road above. Keep her invisible to a world that had decided she didn't exist anymore. The sound that woke her wasn't rain. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the usual symphony of highway noise that had become her lullaby over 4 months in this spot. It was sharper than that, closer. The crack of metal under stress followed by a hollow boom that echoed off the concrete above her head and rolled down the riverbank like distant artillery. Ren sat up, heart already racing. Her hand went automatically to the folding knife she kept tucked inside her boot, not because she wanted to fight, but because sometimes when you're a teenage girl sleeping alone under a bridge, you don't get a choice. She crawled out from under the tarp, blinking against the sodium glare of the streetlights overhead. The air was cold and damp, clinging to her skin through the thin jacket she'd worn for 3 months straight, a men's medium she'd found at a Goodwill donation bin, too big in the shoulders but good enough to keep the worst of the wind out. Her breath misted in front of her face. She looked toward the highway, headlights swinging wildly, then disappearing. Not fading into the distance. Just gone. Like someone had flipped a switch. Ren stood ignoring the ache in her legs. They always ached the way everything always ached when your bed was concrete and cardboard, and your pillow was a balled-up hoodie that smelled like exhaust and river water. Her shoes, worn smooth at the soles, slipped slightly on the loose gravel as she moved toward the riverbank. That's when she saw the crowd forming. 20 people, maybe more. Cars slowing on the highway above doors, opening the blue-white constellation of cell phone screens, lighting up faces that looked curious, concerned, but not concerned enough to do anything about what they were seeing. Ren knew that look. She'd seen it every day for 8 months. The look of people who notice a problem but decide it's not their problem. The look of people who care just enough to feel bad about not caring more. She started running. Nobody else was moving. They were standing at the edge of the road, peering down at the water, like they were watching a nature documentary, pointing, talking, recording. Doing everything except helping. Ren hit the riverbank at a sprint, her worn shoes skidding on wet grass. She nearly went down but caught herself with one hand in the mud and kept moving. The river was high. 3 days of rain had swollen it past its banks, and the current was faster than it looked, deceptive, in the way that dark water always is hiding its power beneath a surface that seems almost peaceful. In the middle of that current, barely visible in the weak light filtering down from the highway, a truck sat half submerged. The hood was already under. Water poured through the broken windshield with the relentless patience of something that couldn't be stopped and knew it. Ren didn't think. Thinking meant hesitation. Hesitation meant someone died, and she'd already had enough death for one lifetime. She kicked off her shoes and dove. The cold hit her like a fist to the sternum. Every muscle in her body locked up, screaming at her to get out, get warm, get safe. The current grabbed her immediately, trying to drag her downstream away from the truck, away from whoever was trapped inside. She fought it, kicking hard, arms pulling through water that felt thick as oil, her clothes soaking through in seconds, adding weight she couldn't afford. The distance to the truck felt impossible. Every stroke forward felt like half a stroke back. Her lungs burned, her arms screamed. The cold was in her bones now, a deep, aching numbness that made her fingers clumsy and her thoughts slow. But Ren Avery had learned something in 8 months on the street that most people never learn in a lifetime. You don't give up just because something's hard. You don't stop just because it hurts. You give up when you're dead. And Ren Avery wasn't dead yet. She reached the truck and grabbed the side mirror, pulling herself alongside the driver's door. The water was up to the windows now. Through the glass, distorted, dark, fractured by the river's movement, she could see someone inside. Still moving. Barely. Ren pounded on the glass with her fist. The sound was muffled, swallowed by the river's roar. She grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. The frame was crushed. The guardrail had folded into the door like a can opener, sealing it shut. She braced her feet against the submerged guardrail and pulled again harder. Her hands slipped on the cold metal. Skin tore. She felt it, the sharp, bright pain of flesh, separating from flesh. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because she'd already failed once today. She'd already seen something she should have reported, already made the coward's choice, already walked away, when walking away was easy. She wasn't going to walk away from this. She pulled harder. The door groaned. Metal screamed against metal. The seal broke. Water rushed in faster, but the door finally moved 2 inches, 4 inches, enough to wedge her shoulder into the gap and force it wider. Ren reached inside, wrapping her arms around the driver. The weight was staggering, 200 pounds of solid muscle, tall and broad, dead weight, in the way that unconscious bodies always are. She dragged the woman free of the cab, fighting the current step by agonizing step, her legs shaking, her lungs on fire, her hands leaving bloody prints on everything she touched. By the time they hit the shore, Ren collapsed to her knees. The driver coughed violently beside her, water spilling from her mouth, air tearing back into lungs that had been seconds from giving up. Around them, voices surged, people rushing forward, now that the danger was over, hands grabbing, shouting for help, performing the theater of concern that should have happened 5 minutes ago. Ren didn't wait. She didn't wait for thanks. Didn't give her name. Didn't stick around for the paramedics or the police or the news cameras that would arrive within minutes. She just stood up on shaking legs, picked up her shoes from the riverbank, and disappeared back into the shadows beneath the bridge. Back into the darkness. Back into the invisible life she'd been living for 8 months. Gone. Like she'd never been there at all. But what Ren Avery didn't see as she walked away shivering, exhausted, her hands leaving the trail of blood on the gravel, was the woman she'd saved opening her eyes. Didn't hear her asking in a voice raw from river water and oxygen deprivation who'd pulled her out. Didn't know that the woman lying on that muddy riverbank, surrounded by paramedics and strobing red lights, was the president of the most powerful motorcycle club in the state of Florida. And she definitely didn't know that within hours, 150 Hells Angels would begin the largest search operation the city of Tampa had ever seen. Well, for her. 8 months earlier, Ren Avery had been someone different. Her real name was the same. She hadn't needed to change it because nobody was looking for her. But the person attached to that name had been someone else entirely. A girl with a future, a girl with a family, a girl whose biggest worry was whether her old laptop would survive 4 more years of college or whether her parents should budget for a new one. Her friends had called her Sparrow, a nickname from cross country, because she was small and fast and seemed to fly when she ran, her feet barely touching the ground, her body cutting through the wind like something built for speed and nothing else. She'd been the fastest runner on her high school team. She'd won state championships. She'd earned a full academic scholarship to Florida State University, and her parents had looked at her the way parents look at children who have exceeded every hope they ever dared to have. Her parents, her parents. Thomas and Catherine Avery. He was a high school math teacher who loved crossword puzzles and couldn't cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. She was a pediatric nurse who cried at dog food commercials and sang slightly off-key in the car and always had a tissue in her pocket for somebody else's tears. They were good people, simple people, the kind of people who showed up for parent-teacher conferences and packed lunches with notes inside and believed with the quiet faith of the genuinely decent that if you raised your child right, the world would be right back. They never made it home from Ren's 18th birthday dinner. September 14th. A small Italian restaurant on Dale Mabry Boulevard, her mother's favorite because they made the pasta fresh, and her father's favorite because they had a wine list he actually understood. They talked about college, about dorm rooms and meal plans, about whether Florida State's library would be open late enough for Ren's study habits and whether she should bring her running shoes or buy new ones once she got there. Her mother had been excited, her father cautious but proud, both of them looking at their daughter like she was the best thing they had ever done. They were heading home on East 75 when the van hit them. A stolen cargo van driven by a man fleeing a trafficking bust at 90 miles per hour through residential neighborhoods. No headlights, no regard for traffic signals, pedestrians, other vehicles, or the basic laws of physics. The van ran a red light at the intersection of Dale Mabry and Kennedy Boulevard and hit the Avery's Camry on the driver's side at an estimated 75 miles per hour. The coroner said they died instantly. The coroner said they didn't suffer. The coroner said a lot of things that were meant to be comforting but weren't because no amount of clinical language can make it acceptable that two good people are dead because a monster was running from the consequences of selling children. Ren didn't cry when the police told her. Two officers, young, uncomfortable, using the careful voices of people who are about to destroy your world and know it. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom, still wearing the dress she'd put on for dinner, still tasting the tiramisu her mother had insisted they order for dessert, and she listened to words that didn't make sense, that couldn't make sense, that were sounds without meaning, like hearing a language you've never studied. She didn't cry at the funeral either. 3 days later, extended family flying in from across the country, people she barely knew wrapping their arms around her and telling her how sorry they were, how strong she was being, how proud her parents would be. She stood there in a black dress that wasn't hers, borrowed from a neighbor, and accepted their condolences with the blank automatic courtesy of someone running on empty. Social services showed up 2 weeks after the funeral, a tired woman with kind eyes and a clipboard full of forms. She explained Ren's options with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd given this speech too many times to too many orphaned children in too many living rooms that still smelled like the people who'd died. Ren was 18, legally an adult, but with no job, no income, and a mortgage she couldn't pay, she needed help. Option 1, adult shelters, temporary housing while she figured things out. Option 2, extended foster care. She qualified by age, and a family in Temple Terrace had space. Good people, they'd help her transition. Option 3, family. Did she have relatives who could take her in? She had an uncle in Ohio, her father's brother. They'd met twice in Ren's entire life. The man hadn't even come to the funeral, just sent flowers and a card that said in someone else's handwriting, "Sorry for your loss." Ren chose option 2. Glenn and Donna Parnell seemed nice at first, mid-50s empty nesters, their own children grown and scattered across the country. They had a spare bedroom with a decent bed and a window that looked out over a backyard with an above-ground pool. Donna baked cookies the first day. Glenn asked about her college plans. They seemed genuinely interested in helping a grieving teenager find her footing. It lasted 6 weeks. The problem wasn't abuse, not the kind people imagine when they hear the word. Nobody hit her, nobody locked her in her room or withheld food. It was subtler than that, more insidious. The kind of damage that doesn't leave bruises, but hollows you out from the inside piece by piece until you realize you're not a person in this house. You're a line item. It was the way Donna looked at her when she came home from school. Not with warmth, not with hostility, but with the particular blankness of someone calculating how much longer they had to tolerate a disruption to the quiet retirement they'd been planning. It was the way Glenn talked about her in the third person when she was standing right there. The foster kid. Our placement. The girl. Never Wren, never Sparrow, never her name. It was the way they made her eat dinner in her room when company came over because it would be awkward to explain. The way her birthday, the first birthday without her parents, the anniversary of the worst night of her life, passed without a single word of acknowledgement. The way they talked about the state stipend they received for housing her like it was combat pay for tolerating her existence. The suffocating realization that she was a checkbox on a government form, a monthly deposit, a body-occupying space, nothing more. She left on a Tuesday night in February. Didn't pack much. Everything she owned fit in a backpack. Clothes, toothbrush, photograph of her parents from their 20th wedding anniversary, her mother laughing at something her father had said, both of them caught in a moment of pure, unguarded joy that would never come again. And the acceptance letter from Florida State that didn't mean anything anymore, because the people who would have driven her to orientation and helped her carry boxes into her dorm room and cried in the parking lot when it was time to say goodbye were buried in a cemetery on the south side of Tampa. She walked out the front door while the Parnells watched television in the next room. Neither of them looked up. She wasn't sure they even noticed she was gone. That was 8 months ago. Ren learned fast. How survival worked when you had nothing and nobody. How to avoid the police who would send her back to foster care or worse, to the Parnells. How to avoid the older men who lurked around the shelters in the underpasses, who saw a young girl alone and thought, easy target. How to avoid the gang recruiters who worked the parks after dark offering food and belonging and protection that always came with strings attached. She learned which gas stations would let her use the bathroom without buying anything, which fast food places threw out food that was still good if you timed the dumpster run right, which churches offered free meals on which days. She learned that invisible was safe. That drawing attention, any kind of attention from anyone for any reason, was the most dangerous thing you could do when you were young and female and sleeping in places that weren't designed for sleeping. She found the spot under the I-275 bridge in April. It was unclaimed. No one else's belongings stashed there. No territorial markings, no signs of prior occupation. Just empty space beneath concrete and rebar, where the highway roared overhead and most people never thought to look down. It wasn't a home, not by any definition that mattered, but it was hers. The first thing that had been hers since the night everything ended. She'd been there 4 months when she heard the crash that would change everything. But first, before the crash, before the river, before the moment that split her life into before and after, something else happened, something that would haunt her for months. Something that would drive her into black water on a cold night when every instinct she had told her to stay on the shore. It was the morning of the crash, hours before the Silverado went through the guardrail, before headlights disappeared into the river, before Shay Colton felt the water close over her face. Ren woke before dawn the way she always did. Sleep was a tenant that never stayed long and never paid rent. It showed up when it wanted it left, when it pleased, and never once asked if the arrangement was working for her. She crawled out from under her tarp and took stock. $3.47 in her pocket. Enough for a breakfast sandwich at McDonald's if she was careful with the order. Half a bottle of water warm from spending the night tucked against her body. The clothes on her back, jeans, a t-shirt, the oversized jacket, all of it carrying the particular staleness that comes from not having access to a shower in 3 weeks. She needed to move soon. The homeless encampment 200 yards east was growing. More people every week, which meant more attention, more police, more sweeps. Ren had learned to stay ahead of the sweeps. Move before they came. Keep a low profile. Don't get comfortable, because comfortable was just another word for careless. She rolled up her sleeping bag, stuffed it in her backpack, and started walking along the riverbank toward the underpass. That's when she saw them. 2 men standing near the guardrail on the highway above. Not walking, not moving, just standing there in the gray pre-dawn light looking at something. Ren stopped, watched. One of the men pulled something from a duffel bag, long metal catching the faint light from the street lamps. It took her a second to recognize it. Bolt cutters, industrial grade. The kind you use to cut through chain link fences or heavy padlocks, or apparently the support structure of a highway guardrail. The man positioned the cutters against the rail, leaned his weight into them. Metal scream once, twice, 3 times 4. Clean cuts, deliberate, surgical. The other man kept watch, his head swiveling up and down the highway, scanning for headlights, for witnesses, for anyone who might see what they were doing. But they didn't look down, didn't think to check beneath the bridge, where a homeless girl stood frozen in place, barely breathing, watching two men sabotage a guardrail on a major highway with the calm efficiency of people who had done this kind of thing before. Ren's hand went to her pocket, to the cheap prepaid phone she'd bought 3 months ago with $15 saved from panhandling. No plan, no minutes left, practically useless for anything except one thing that still had a camera. She lifted it, aimed, took 4 photos before her hands started shaking too badly to hold the phone steady. The images were grainy, underlit, shot from below at an awkward angle, but they were clear enough. Two men, bolt cutters, a guardrail being systematically cut. Timestamp 6:47 a.m. The men finished their work, packed up their tools, got into a black SUV parked on the highway shoulder, drove away without looking back. Ren stood there for a long time staring up at the damaged guardrail. The cuts were invisible from the road. The rail looked normal, intact the way it had always looked. But she'd watched it happen. She knew the truth. Somebody had turned that guardrail into a trap. Somebody was going to hit it today, tomorrow, next week, and when they did, it was going to give way like it was made of paper. She should tell someone, call the police, report it. But Ren Avery didn't call the police because the police meant questions. Questions meant attention. Attention meant getting pulled back into the system, back to foster care, back to the Parnells, back to being a checkbox on a clipboard in a tired woman's hands. She'd rather take her chances with the bridge and the river and the cold than go back to being invisible inside a house where nobody said her name. So she did nothing. Deleted the photos from her recent folders so they wouldn't eat up the phone's limited storage. Walked away. Tried to forget about it. 12 hours later, she heard the crash. Saw headlights disappear into the river. Watched a truck sink beneath black water at the exact spot where the guardrail had been cut. And she realized with the kind of sick, poisonous certainty that sits in your gut like a stone, you can never digest that she could have prevented it. That someone was dying right now because she'd been too scared to make a phone call. That her silence had a body count. That realization, more than the cold water, more than the fear, more than the exhaustion that lived in her bones like a permanent tenant, was what drove her into that river. Not heroism, not courage, not some noble impulse to save a stranger. Guilt. Pure, corrosive, unforgettable guilt. And in the end, guilt was enough. Shay Colton woke to the smell of antiseptic in the steady beep of machines keeping count of a life she hadn't expected to still have. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Didn't know how she'd gotten here. Her body felt wrong, heavy, disconnected, wrapped in pain that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She tried to move, and something in her left side exploded, a white-hot flare that turned her vision to static. Ribs. Broken. 3 of them at least. Her head throbbed beneath something tight, bandages wrapped around her skull like a helmet made of gauze and tape. Memory came back in fragments. Pieces of a puzzle falling into place one at a time, each one sharper than the last. The meeting. The drive home. Headlights sudden, blinding, deliberate. The guardrail giving way. The river. Water filling her lungs with patient mechanical efficiency. Darkness. And then hands. Small hands, strong hands pulling her through twisted metal and churning water. A face, young, thin eyes, wide with fear, and something else. Something harder. Determination. A girl. A kid. Skinny, soaked, shaking. Pulling Shay Colton's 200 pounds through a wrecked door frame and a raging current with nothing but willpower and bleeding fingers. Easy. The voice came from her right. Male. Familiar. Carrying the particular mix of worry and relief that comes from spending 6 hours in a hospital chair, wondering if the person in the bed is going to wake up. Shay turned her head, ignoring the spike of pain the movement sent through her skull. Briggs Harlan sat in the chair beside her, bed, his leather jacket creased from the hours he'd spent folded into a piece of furniture not designed for a man his size. His vice president patch was visible beneath the open collar. His face looked like it had aged 5 years overnight. Where am I? Tampa General. Briggs leaned forward. You've been out for 6 hours. Doctors say 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, internal bruising. You're lucky to be breathing. Lucky? Shay tasted the word. It didn't taste like luck. It tasted like river water and blood, and the particular flavor of survival that only people who've been close enough to death to smell it can recognize. The girl who pulled me out. Where is she? Briggs shook his head. Gone. disappeared before the paramedics arrived. Nobody got a name. Nobody knows who she was. Just a kid witnesses say she came out of nowhere, went into the water, pulled you out, and vanished. Find her. Shay. I said find her. Her voice had steel in it now. The voice that had kept 150 bikers in line for 8 years. The voice that didn't ask twice. The voice that turned requests into orders and orders into facts. Briggs nodded slowly. Already working on it. Got descriptions from witnesses. Young 18, maybe younger. Thin, torn clothes, looked homeless. Hands were bleeding bad from pulling open your door. Homeless. That detail lodged itself in Shay's chest somewhere between the broken ribs. A kid with nothing, no home, no family, no safety net, had risked everything for a complete stranger. Had jumped into a freezing river in the middle of the night when 20 grown adults with warm cars and working phones and every advantage in the world had just stood there and watched. The door opened. 2 police officers stepped in, followed by a man in a rumpled suit who looked like he hadn't slept either. Miss Colton, I'm Detective Nathan Corwin. I need to ask you some questions about the accident. It wasn't an accident. The detective paused, his pen hovering over a notebook. Ma'am, someone ran me off that road. Black SUV, no plates I could see. Hit me deliberately. Forced me through the guardrail. Corwin and the officers exchanged a look, the kind of look cops give each other when a case just got more complicated than they wanted it to be. Are you sure could it have been? I've been riding for 24 years, detective. I know the difference between a careless driver and someone trying to kill me. Corwin's expression shifted. The bored routine demeanor of a man working an accident case fell away, replaced by something sharper, more focused. There's something you should know, he said. We examined the crash site, the guardrail. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photograph, held it up for her to see. A close-up of metal, cut marks, clean, precise, made with industrial tools. Not damaged by impact, not weakened by age or weather. Cut, deliberately, surgically, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone sabotaged it, Corwin said. Cut through the support structure, left just enough integrity that it would hold under normal stress, but fail on impact. This wasn't road rage, Miss Colton. This was premeditated. This was attempted murder. Shay stared at the photograph, at the evidence of calculation, of patience, of the kind of cold, methodical planning that doesn't just want someone dead, it wants to make it look like an accident, like fate, like bad luck on a rainy night. They hadn't just tried to kill her. They'd engineered a trap and waited for her to drive into it. Dominic Slade, she said quietly. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Corwin looked at her. Slade. He runs trafficking operations out of South Tampa. I refuse to let him use our territory for his routes. This is his response. Briggs shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The officers were writing. Corwin just nodded slowly, like a man who'd suspected as much but hadn't wanted to be right. We'll need a formal statement, the detective said. Everything you know about Slade, his operation, his associates. You'll get it, Shay said. Every name, every route, every connection I can give you. But first, I need to find the girl who saved me. Corwin frowned. We have witness statements. We're pursuing leads. This isn't about your case, detective. Shay's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. That girl risked her life for mine when everyone else just stood there and recorded it for their Instagram stories. I owe her a debt, and I pay my debts. After the police left, Briggs leaned back in his chair and studied Shay with the patient, assessing gaze of a man who'd known her for 15 years and still couldn't always predict what she'd do next. You really want to mobilize everybody to find one homeless kid? Yes. People are going to ask questions. Wonder why we're putting so much effort into his phone. Let them wonder. Let them ask. Shay looked at him steadily. Her eyes cleared despite the concussion, despite the pain, despite the 6 hours of unconsciousness in the 3 broken ribs, and the memory of water closing over her face. What would you do, Briggs, if someone pulled you out of a sinking car while 20 people stood on the bank and did nothing? Briggs was quiet. Then he nodded. I'll make the calls. He was at the door when Shay's voice stopped him. And Briggs, I want to know everything about Dominic Slade's operation. Every route he runs, every contact he has, every dirty cop on his payroll. If he wants a war, we'll give him one. What kind of war? Up on legal. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Legal. Legal, Shay confirmed. We build a case. We hand it to the FBI. We take him down through the courts, through the system, through the law. We're not the criminals here, Briggs. We're the ones who said no to trafficking children. And we need people to understand that. We need the world to see the difference between who we are and who he is. She paused, winced as her ribs reminded her they were broken. Make sure everybody understands that. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. And it starts with finding that girl. The meeting that had started everything, that had set in motion the chain of events leading to a sabotaged guardrail, a truck in a river, and a homeless teenager diving into black water, had taken place 24 hours before the crash. Shay had been in the Angels clubhouse on the outskirts of Tampa, working on chapter finances at the main table with Briggs beside her and 3 other angels posted around the room. Not for protection, not exactly. More as a reminder, a visual statement that whoever walked through that door was walking into someone else's territory. Dominic Slade walked in like he owned the place. No appointment, no advance notice. Just showed up with 2 bodyguards flanking him, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His hair slicked back, his smile the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. The smile of a man who was used to getting what he wanted and had stopped pretending otherwise a long time ago. Thank you for seeing me, Slade said, though his tone made it clear he'd expected nothing less. Expected her to be grateful. Expected her to be reasonable. Expected her to be a woman running a motorcycle club who would listen to a man in an expensive suit and understand the way women were supposed to understand that some offers weren't really offers. They were instructions. Shay stayed seated. You have 5 minutes. Make them count. Slade's smile widened just barely. Direct. I appreciate that. Let me be equally direct. I run logistics, distribution. I have routes through Florida that need reliable partners. Your territory, your highways, very useful for my purposes. We're not in the drug business. I'm not asking you to sell, just to allow passage. Your roads, your protection, a very lucrative arrangement. $50,000 a month cash. Just for looking the other way when my shipments come through. No. The word hung in the air. Flat. Final. A wall. Slade's smile faded by exactly 1 degree. You haven't heard my full offer. I don't need to. We don't move drugs. We don't protect people who do. That's not negotiable. Everything's negotiable, Ms. Colton. He leaned forward in his chair. His bodyguards shifted behind him like shadows responding to a change in the light. There's also another aspect to my business. Moving people. High-value cargo that needs discrete routes. Your highways would be perfect for... The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Shay's voice when she spoke was very quiet. The kind of quiet that people who know her recognize as far more dangerous than shouting. Say that again. Slade either didn't notice the danger or didn't care. Human cargo, mostly young, mostly female, very profitable market if you know the right buyers. I could cut you in for get out. Get out. Shay stood slowly. Briggs and the other angels moved with her, not threatening, not advancing, just shifting the weight of the room, the geometry of power, making it clear that the balance had changed and would not be changing back. You walk into my house, you tell me you traffic children, and you expect me to help you. I expect you to be smart. Slade's voice was still calm, still controlled, but something colder had crept into the edges. This is happening whether you participate or not. I'm offering you a chance to profit instead of, my father was trafficked. Shay's voice cut through his sentence like a blade through silk. Controlled. Too controlled. The way a voice sounds when every word is being chosen with the same care you'd use to handle a loaded weapon. Taken from a town in rural West Virginia when he was 10 years old. Sold to a garment factory. Worked 16-hour days until he was 14 and managed to escape. He tried to build a normal life after that. Got married, had me, but the nightmares never stopped. The fear never stopped. The memories of what they did to him, what grown men did to a child, those never stopped either. The room was silent. When I was 15, Shay continued, her voice steady as a flat line. My father put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Because he couldn't live with what had been done to him. Because the trauma broke something inside him that nobody could fix. Not my mother, not the doctors, not me. She stepped closer to Slade. One step. Close enough to see the pores on his face, the careful blankness in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. So when you walk into my clubhouse and tell me you want to use my roads to do to other children what was done to my father, there is only one answer you are ever wanting to get from me. Another step. Briggs and the angels moved with her, a wall of leather and purpose. Get out. Slade stood slowly, straightened his jacket. The smile was gone, now replaced by something colder and more honest. The face beneath the mask. You're making a very dangerous enemy, Ms. Colton. I've had dangerous enemies before. Shay's voice didn't waver, didn't rise, didn't need to. They didn't end well. We'll see. Slade turned toward the door, then paused, looked back over his shoulder with the casual malice of a man accustomed to having the last word. Accidents happen, Shay. Roads can be dangerous, especially at night. A pause. You should be careful. Then he was gone, bodyguards following. The door closing with a soft click that sounded in the silence of the room like the cocking of a hammer. Briggs exhaled slowly. That was a threat. That was a promise, Shay corrected, which means we need to be ready. But she hadn't been ready. Not for how fast Slade would move. Not for how methodical his response would be. Not for the calculated precision of a trap designed to look like a tragic accident on a rainy night. 12 hours after that meeting, she'd been in the river drowning, certain she was going to die. And a homeless girl, she'd never met a girl who'd lost everything, who had nothing, who the world had thrown away like garbage, had decided that Shay Colton's life was worth saving. Now lying in a hospital bed with 3 broken ribs and a concussion and the taste of river water still in the back of her throat, Shay made a decision. She was going to find that girl. She was going to protect her because Slade would come after anyone connected to the crash, anyone who could be a witness, anyone whose existence threatened the carefully constructed fiction that what happened on that bridge was an accident. She was going to give that girl the family she clearly didn't have, the safety she clearly needed, the chance she clearly deserved. And then she was going to destroy Dominic Slade's operation so completely, so thoroughly, so permanently, that he would spend the rest of his life wishing he'd never heard the name Shay Colton. But first, she needed to get out of this hospital. She pressed the call button for the nurse. When the woman appeared mid-40s, efficient, the kind of nurse who had seen enough self-destructive patients to recognize one on sight, Shay smiled. The kind of smile that had convinced more than one person to do something they knew they shouldn't. I need to discharge myself, Shay said, against medical advice if necessary. The nurse frowned. Ms. Colton, you have 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and significant internal bruising. You need to remain under observation for at least, I need to find someone who saved my life. And every hour I spend in this bed is an hour that girl is out there in danger. I really can't recommend. I'm not asking for a recommendation. Shay's voice was gentle, patient, immovable. I'm telling you I'm leaving. You can make it official with the proper paperwork, or I can walk out right now wearing this hospital gown and nothing else. Your choice. The nurse sighed, the sigh of a woman who recognized an unstoppable force when she saw one. I'll get the discharge forms. 3 hours later, Shay Colton walked out of Tampa General Hospital, wearing borrowed clothes from Briggs's truck, moving carefully to protect her ribs, her head still throbbing with every heartbeat. Pain was manageable. Pain always was if you had enough practice. And Shay Colton had more practice with pain than most people accumulate in a lifetime. The clubhouse was waiting. Not just her chapter. Word had spread the way it always does in the Angels' fast electric unstoppable. Florida president nearly killed. Ran off the road. Guardrail sabotaged. Someone tried to take out Shay Colton. Within hours, bikes had started rolling in from across the state. Orlando, Jacksonville, Fort Myers, Sarasota. Men and women who didn't need to be asked, who didn't need to be ordered, who heard that their president was hurt and did the only thing that made sense to them. They came. By the time Shay arrived at the clubhouse, there were nearly 100 bikes in the parking lot, more arriving every hour. The rumble of engines was constant, a low rolling thunder that shook the windows and vibrated through the floorboards and announced to anyone within earshot that something significant was happening here. She walked through the front door to absolute silence. Every eye in the room turned to her, 100 faces showing concern. Relief and anger, the particular focused anger of people who protect their own and have just learned that someone tried to take from them. Shay moved to the front of the room, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and looked at the assembled angels, her family. Dominic Slade tried to kill me last night, she said. Her voice carried in the quiet, not because she raised it, but because every person in that room was leaning forward to hear her the way you lean toward a flame in the cold. He tried to kill me because I wouldn't let him traffic children through our territory, because I told him that kids are sacred, that they're not cargo, and that I would never help anyone who treats them like they are. Murmurs of anger rippled through the room, the sound of leather creaking as fists clenched, the sound of boots shifting on hardwood, the sound of people who had been waiting for direction and were about to receive it. He failed, Shay continued, not because of luck, not because of the guardrail or the paramedics or some miracle. He failed because a homeless girl, a kid maybe 18 years old with nothing to her name and everything to lose, dove into that river while 20 people stood on the bank and watched and filmed. She risked her life for a complete stranger, got me out, saved me, and then she disappeared back into the shadows like she was never there at all. She paused. Let the silence work. Let that sink in. A girl with nothing gave everything, while people with everything gave nothing. The room was absolutely still. We're going to find her. Every chapter, every member, every resource we have. We search this city until we locate her. Shelters, soup kitchens, underpasses, parks, abandoned buildings, and anywhere someone without a home might be. An older angel in the back, Diesel 55, built like a fire hydrant, a scar running from temple to jaw, spoke up. Respectful but direct. President is that wise, mobilizing everybody for one kid. Slade's still out there. We should be focused on Slade can wait. But no. Shay's eyes swept the room hard as iron, warm as a hearth. I refuse to help Slade traffic children. I'm not going to turn around and abandon a kid who actually gave a damn when it mattered. We find her. We protect her. We make sure she's safe. Because if we won't do that, then what was the point of saying no to Slade in the first place? She looked around the room, challenging anyone to disagree. Nobody did. Nobody could. Because she was right and they all knew it. There's one more thing. Shay's voice dropped, became something harder. Slade's people are already looking for her too. They've been hitting shelters, asking questions about a kid who pulled someone from the river. They're not asking nicely. The room's energy shifted, anger becoming purpose, concern becoming resolve. This is a race, Shay said. We find her first or they do. And if they find her first, she's dead. A witness to attempted murder alone on the street with no one to protect her. She straightened despite the pain, despite the ribs, despite everything. We start at dawn, teams of 3, cover every sector of this city. Someone out there knows who she is, where she sleeps, what name she goes by. We find her, we bring her in. We make sure Slade's people don't get to her first. And Slade? Briggs asked from beside her. Shay's smile was cold, sharp, the smile of a woman who had already decided how the story was going to end. We destroy him, every route, every operation, every contact. But we do it legally, through law enforcement, through the courts, through the system. We prove that we're not the criminals here, that we never were, that we're the ones who stand between predators and children. She straightened further and the pain didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except what came next. Dominic Slade wanted to turn us into monsters. Instead, we're going to show this city what it looks like when people with power choose to protect the powerless, starting with one homeless girl who deserves better than what this world has given her. The room erupted, not in cheers, that wasn't their way. It erupted in the low rumble of readiness. The creak of leather, the clink of chains, the sound of boots hitting the floor as 100 people stood up at once, the sound of engines starting in the parking lot as word spread to the riders still arriving. By midnight, the number had reached 150. 150 Hells Angels from across Florida gathered in one place for a single purpose: not to fight, not to intimidate, not to make war, to find a homeless girl who had saved their president's life, to bring her home, to prove that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when the water's rising. Dawn broke cold over Tampa, painting the sky in shades of gray and amber that looked like bruises healing. 150 motorcycles rolled out from the Angels clubhouse in formation, not a show of force, but a statement of purpose. The rumble of their engines echoed through empty streets, vibrating through windows and walls, and the bones of a city that was about to learn what it looked like when a family went looking for one of its own. Shay stood in the parking lot watching them go. Her ribs ached despite the medication. Her head still throbbed, but she'd refused to stay behind because leaders don't send people into the field and wait at home for reports. Leaders ride at the front. Briggs appeared beside her holding out a helmet. "You sure about this?" The doctor said. "I'll rest when we find her." Shay took the helmet, felt its weight in her hands. "Wait, where are we searching?" Briggs pulled out a map, unfolding it on the hood of his truck. The city of Tampa divided into sectors, each one assigned to a team. Ybor City and the eastern shelters for us. Teams covering downtown, the Port District, Temple Terrace, and everything in between. "If she's in this city, we'll find her." Shay nodded, mounted her bike. The pain in her ribs flared white hot as she settled into the seat, but she pushed it down the way she always pushed it down, with will, with purpose, with the knowledge that somewhere out there, a girl who had saved her life was sleeping under a bridge, and every minute that passed was a minute Slade's people were closing in. Pain was just information. You could choose what to do with it. They rode east into the rising sun, and the search began. The first shelter they visited was a converted church on Nebraska Avenue, a low brick building with a cross on the roof that had lost one arm to a hurricane 3 years ago and never been repaired. The remaining arm pointed sideways like a hand reaching for something it would never touch. Sister Margaret had been running the place for 20 years, feeding the hungry, sheltering the desperate, and asking nothing in return except that you wipe your feet and treat the other guests with basic human decency. She was in her 60s, small, iron-spined, with the particular kind of toughness that comes from spending 2 decades looking at human suffering and choosing every single morning to show up anyway. She listened to Shay's description without interruption, studied the grainy photograph Briggs showed her on his phone pulled from highway security footage, enhanced as much as the Angels' limited tech resources allowed. A blurry shape, young, female, thin. "Skinny girl, 18, torn clothes," Sister Margaret repeated, turning the phone in her hands like the angle might reveal something the image couldn't. "That describes half the young women who come through here. Maybe more." "She would have had bandaged hands," Shay said, "torn up bad from pulling open a car door underwater. She might have been here 3, 4 months ago, maybe more recently." Something shifted in Sister Margaret's expression. A flicker of recognition, not certainty, but the particular sharpening of attention that comes when a vague description suddenly matches a specific memory. "There was a girl," she said slowly. "Dylan," she said her name was. "Quiet, polite, always said thank you for the meals, which you'd be surprised how many people don't. Stopped coming about 3 weeks ago." "Why'd she stop?" "I don't know. Kids drift. They find other places, or they leave the city entirely, or they—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew the other ways that sentence ended. "But I remember her because she was different. Most of the young ones who come through here, they're angry, hardened. This girl wasn't angry. She was just sad, like she was grieving something she didn't know how to put down." Shay felt that description settle into her chest. A girl carrying grief like a weight she couldn't set down. She knew what that felt like. Had carried her own grief for 29 years since the morning she'd found her father on the bathroom floor with the gun still in his hand, and the silence that followed pressing down on her like the weight of every ocean in the world. "Did she ever mention where she was staying?" Briggs asked. "No, but one of the other regulars might know. There's a man goes by Preacher. He looks out for the younger ones, keeps them safe when he can, which isn't always, but he tries. He might have talked to your girl." "Where do we find Preacher?" "He usually sets up under the overpass on 22nd Street. Sells recycled cans to make money. You can't miss him. Tall gray beard, always wears a red baseball cap like it's the last thing in the world he owns. She paused. Because it probably is. Shay pulled $500 from her jacket pocket and set it on the desk between them. For the shelter. Sister Margaret looked at the money, then at Shay. I didn't do this for payment. I know. Take it anyway. For the kids you feed, for the ones who say thank you and the ones who don't. The nun studied her for a long moment, reading something in Shay's face that satisfied whatever question she'd been asking herself. Then she folded the bills and slipped them into her habit. Find that girl. She deserves better than what she's been getting. That's the plan. They found Preacher exactly where Sister Margaret said they would. Under the overpass on 22nd Street, surrounded by garbage bags full of aluminum cans, sorting them by type with the methodical patience of a man who had turned repetition into meditation. He was in his 60s, Earl Gibbons, though nobody had called him that in decades. Tall, weathered by 40 years of living under open skies, his face a topographic map of hard years and harder choices. The red baseball cap sat on his head like a crown. His eyes were sharp, though, sharp and assessing. The eyes of a man who had survived 4 decades on the street by being smarter than the people who thought surviving the street was easy. He saw the angels coming from 50 yards away. Watched them approach with the careful stillness of someone calculating exits angles odds. 3 bikers, leather, patches, size. Not looking for trouble, Briggs said, hands visible, palms up. Just information. About what? Preacher's voice carried the rasp of years spent breathing exhaust fumes and cigarette smoke and the particular chemical cocktail of air that collects beneath highway overpasses. A girl, 18, skinny, been on the street about 8 months. Shay stepped forward, showing him the same enhanced photograph. Might have been calling herself Dylan. Preacher studied the image the way he'd studied the angels, with care, with precision, with the particular attention of a man who understood that information was currency and giving it away for free was a luxury he couldn't always afford. Might have seen her. Why you looking? She saved my life. Shay said it simply, without embellishment, without drama. Just fact. Pulled me out of a sinking car 3 nights ago. Disappeared before I could thank her. Now she's in danger and I need to find her before someone else does. Preacher watched her face. Reading truth from lies the way you learn to when your survival depends on it every single day. When you live in a world where everyone wants something from you and most of them don't care what it costs you to give it. What kind of danger? The kind that comes from people who tried to kill me and don't like witnesses, Briggs said from behind Shay. Preacher was quieted for a long moment, sorting cans, thinking. The aluminum clinked softly against aluminum, a sound like small bells ringing for no congregation. Then he nodded. The girl you're looking for is smart, careful, doesn't trust easy, can't blame her for that. Moves around a lot to avoid the sweeps. Stays away from the bigger encampments because she knows they draw police attention. Do you know where she is now? Last I heard she was sleeping under the I-275 bridge, east side, but that was before. He paused, adjusted his cap. Before she saved someone from the river. Now she's probably gone. Kid like that she knows drawing attention is dangerous. She'll have moved the same night. Shay felt the frustration tighten in her chest. A girl who was smart enough to disappear. Smart enough to know that saving someone's life had made her visible. Invisible was the most dangerous thing you could be when you had nothing and nobody. There's something else, Preacher said. He'd stopped sorting cans. His hands were still, which meant what he was about to say mattered. There's a little girl, 9 years old, goes by Finch. She's been on the street about 6 months, and she shouldn't be out here at all, but she is because the world is what it is. What's her connection to the girl we're looking for? Your girl, Dylan Sparrow, whatever she's calling herself, she looks out for Finch, shares food when she has it, makes sure the older guys don't bother her, sleeps near her when the weather's bad. They're not related by blood, but on the street, blood doesn't mean much. What matters is who shows up. Shay felt something tighten in her throat. An 18-year-old girl with nothing protecting a 9-year-old girl with less than nothing. Sharing food she didn't have enough of. Standing guard over a child who wasn't hers because nobody else was standing guard over either of them. Where's Finch? Moves around, but I saw her yesterday near the port. Abandoned warehouse on 28th Street. Used to be a carpet factory back before everything got shipped overseas. If your girl is still protecting Finch, she might be there too. Thank you. Shay meant it. Meant it in the way you mean things when someone gives you a piece of information that might save a life. Preacher pocketed the bills Shay left on the crate beside him without counting them. You find that girl, you tell her Preacher says she did good, saving a life when everybody else just watched. That takes character. That takes the kind of person most people wish they were, but aren't. I will. They were turning to leave when Preacher's voice stopped them. Harder now, sharper. The voice of a man delivering a warning. One more thing. There have been other people asking around. Not cops, not angels. Different crew. They've been hitting the same shelters, the same spots, asking the same questions. Looking for a girl who pulled someone from the river. Shay's blood went cold. She'd expected it, known it was coming, known Slade would send people, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that they were already out there and already searching, already closing in on a girl who didn't know she was being hunted, turned the urgency from theoretical to immediate. When did they start? Yesterday, 3 men, black SUV. They're not polite about it either. Leaned on a couple of the older guys at the Henderson Street shelter. Broke a man's fingers for not talking fast enough. If they come back, Briggs said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of a man who had spent 30 years projecting exactly how dangerous he could be without raising a hand, don't tell them anything. Preacher looked at him with the amused patience of a man who'd been handling dangerous people since before Briggs was born. Son, I spent 40 years on these streets. I know bad people when I see them. He adjusted his red cap. Why do you think I'm talking to you instead of them? Shay called an emergency meeting from the parking lot of a gas station 6 blocks from the port. Briggs Diesel and the 4 other team leaders gathered around the hood of a truck while she spread out the map and started talking. Slade's people are already in the field, she said. 3 men, black SUV, hitting shelters and encampments. They were at the Henderson Street shelter yesterday, 20 minutes after we left Sister Margaret's. They're following the same trail we are, and they're not far behind. Diesel cursed under his breath. How'd they know to look? Same way we did. Witnesses at the river. Someone talked, or someone posted footage that showed a girl going in. Slade's people watch social media the same way everybody else does. They know a witness exists. They're going to find her unless we get there first. Shay traced a route on the map with her finger, from the Henderson Street shelter to the overpass to the Port District. The same route they'd followed, the same trail of breadcrumbs. We need to change the game, she said. Right now, we're both running the same search pattern. We need to get ahead of them, not follow the same path. She looked at the faces around her. Briggs, Diesel. 4 experienced riders who'd been with her through situations that most people would call impossible. Here's what we do. Diesel, take your team back to the shelter district. I want you visible, loud, obvious. Make it look like we're still searching there. Draw their attention. Keep them focused on the wrong area. A decoy. A decoy. While they're watching you, Briggs and I go to the warehouse on 28th. That's where Preacher says she might be. If we find her, we bring her straight to the clubhouse through the back roads. No highways, no main streets, nothing Slade's people are watching. Diesel nodded. And if they don't take the bait, if they're already at the port, Shay's jaw tightened. Then we improvise. But we don't leave that warehouse without her. Not today. The warehouse on 28th Street was exactly the kind of place a city forgets about and never remembers. 4 walls of crumbling brick windows, shattered or boarded over graffiti scarring every surface, like a written history of neglect. The parking lot had been reclaimed by weeds that pushed through cracks in the asphalt with the stubborn persistence of things that refuse to die, no matter how inhospitable the ground. Briggs parked his bike 2 blocks away. The 2 angels with him did the same. Shay dismounted behind them, moving carefully. Her ribs had settled into a constant, low-grade protest that flared into something sharper whenever she breathed too deeply or turned too quickly. She pushed the pain aside. Pain had an address, and she didn't live there. They approached on foot, moving with the kind of deliberate quiet that comes from years of entering places where surprises could be fatal. The entrance was a rusted door hanging askew on broken hinges. Briggs went first, slipping through the gap with a grace that belied his size. Shay followed. The interior was dim dusty, the air thick with the particular smell of abandonment, damp concrete, rotting drywall. The ghost of chemicals from whatever the factory had manufactured before the jobs went elsewhere. She saw them immediately, two figures against the far wall, tucked into a corner, where two walls met at a right angle, creating a natural alcove that provided shelter from drafts and sight lines from the door. A teenage girl, tall for her age but painfully thin, the kind of thin that comes from months of not eating enough, her hands wrapped in dirty bandages that were brown with dried blood and river mud. Beside her, pressed close enough to share body heat, a little girl, small, dark-haired, 9 years old, and looking at the world with eyes that had already seen too much of it. The teenager saw Briggs immediately. Her body went rigid, a coiled spring ready to launch. Her hand moved protectively toward the smaller girl, positioning her body between the child and the perceived threat. Her other hand went to her boot where Shay could see the outline of a folding knife. Briggs raised both hands, slowly, palms out. The universal gesture of, "I am not here to hurt you," though they both knew how little that gesture actually meant on the street. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" The girl's voice was wary, defensive, pitched low like she was used to making herself smaller than she was. But beneath the wariness, Shay could hear something else. Intelligence, assessment, a mind working at full speed behind eyes that were cataloging every detail of the situation, exits, distances, weapons, odds. Looking for someone, Ren Avery. The girl's expression didn't change, not a muscle. But Shay saw the micro-flinch, the tiny involuntary contraction that humans can't control when they hear their own name spoken by a stranger who shouldn't know it. A tell so small, most people would miss it. Briggs didn't miss it. "My name's Briggs Harlan," he said. "I'm with the Hells Angels. Shay Colton sent me." "Don't know her." "I think you do." Briggs took one careful step forward, then stopped. Sat down on a broken crate 10 feet away, deliberately making himself lower, smaller, less threatening. A man his size sitting down was still imposing, but it was a gesture, and gestures mattered. "I think you pulled her out of the Hillsborough River 3 nights ago. I think you saved her life, and I think you disappeared because that's what you've learned to do when the world pays attention to you." The girl said nothing, but her hands, those bandaged, damaged hands, clenched slightly against the fabric of her jeans. "Those look painful," Briggs said, nodding toward the bandages. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've got open wounds wrapped in dirty cloth, which means infection if you're lucky, and something worse if you're not." He shifted his weight on the crate, settling in, making it clear he wasn't in a hurry, that he'd wait. "Look, I'm not here to drag you anywhere. I just want to talk. Shay wants to thank you properly, that's all." "I don't want anything." "I believe you, but you're in danger whether you want something or not." The girl's eyes narrowed. The little one, Finch, pressed closer to her side, watching Briggs with the unblinking attention of a child who had learned that adults were unpredictable, and that unpredictable meant dangerous. "What kind of danger?" the girl asked. Briggs glanced at Finch, then back, choosing his words with care because some truths are too heavy for a 9-year-old to hear without context. "The woman you pulled from the river, the crash, wasn't an accident. Someone tried to kill her. Cut the guardrail beforehand. Set a trap. The people who did it, they know someone pulled her out. They know there's a witness, and the man who ordered it doesn't leave witnesses alive." The little girl spoke for the first time. Her voice was small but clear, carrying the particular directness of children who have been forced to grow up faster than nature intended. "Who is he?" Briggs looked at her. "Someone very bad. Someone who hurts people." Finch nodded, like this made perfect sense, like she'd already met bad people, like the concept was as familiar to her as rain. "I didn't see who cut the guardrail," the teenager said. Quick, defensive, the words coming out fast like she'd been rehearsing them. "I just saw the car go in, just saw her trapped." "Are you sure about that?" Something flickered in the girl's expression, a shadow crossing a window. Guilt, the same guilt that had driven her into the river. "There were photos," Briggs said gently, "on a phone recovered from a shelter donation bin on Henderson Street. Deleted but retrievable. 4 photos of 2 men cutting through a highway guardrail. Timestamp 6:47 a.m. the morning Shay was run off the road. The girl's breathing had gone shallow. Her hands had stopped moving entirely. "That's your phone, isn't it, Ren?" Briggs used her name deliberately, carefully, not as a weapon but as a recognition, an acknowledgement that she was a person, not a target. "You saw them, took pictures, didn't know what you were looking at, but you documented it anyway. And then you deleted the photos because you were scared, and being scared is the most rational thing in the world when you're 18 and alone, and the system has already failed you once." "I deleted those," she whispered. "Deleted isn't gone. Not permanently. Not when people know where to look." Briggs leaned forward slightly. Not enough to invade her space, but enough to close the emotional distance. "Those photos are evidence, proof of premeditated, attempted murder. With your testimony about what you saw when we're the men, the SUV, we can connect it directly to the man who ordered the hit, and through him to something much bigger. I'm nobody. Why would anyone believe me? Because you have proof, because you're telling the truth." His voice softened. "And because 8 children are counting on it." "What children?" Briggs told her. "About the trafficking operation? About the investigation that had been building for months. About the children, 8 of them ages 7 to 14, locked in rooms in a warehouse in South Tampa, being held like inventory, being treated like product being sold to the highest bidder." Finch listened with an expression that no 9-year-old should ever wear. An expression of recognition, of understanding, of someone hearing a story that is not entirely unfamiliar. "He traffics kids," Briggs finished. "That's what Shay refused to help him do. That's why he tried to kill her. And if we can't prosecute him, if the case falls apart because we don't have enough evidence, he keeps doing it. More children, more warehouses, more lives destroyed." Finch turned to Wren. "You should help them." "It's dangerous. So is this." The little girl gestured around them at the crumbling walls, the broken windows, the concrete floor that served as their bed, the warehouse that wasn't a home and never would be. "At least that way it means something." Wren stared at her, at this 9-year-old who had already learned what most adults never do, that sometimes the safest choice and the right choice are different things, and that the right one is worth the risk. "I'll talk to Shay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, like the words cost her something she couldn't afford to spend. "But Finch comes with me. Wherever I go, she goes. That's not negotiable." Briggs studied them both, saw the bond, the way they leaned toward each other, the way Finch's hand rested on Wren's arm, the way Wren's body was still positioned between the child and every potential threat in the room. The only family either of them had, built not from blood or obligation, but from the simple, profound act of choosing to take care of each other when nobody else would. "Agreed," he said, "but we need to move, now. Slade's people are searching this area. They've been hitting shelters, asking questions. The longer you stay out here, the more danger you're both in." "How do I know you're not lying?" Wren asked. "How do I know this isn't some trick you show up in leather with a story about angels and evil men, and I'm just supposed to trust you?" Briggs pulled out his phone, dialed, put it on speaker. The phone rang twice. Then a voice, female, strong, carrying the particular authority of someone who had earned every ounce of respect she'd ever been given. "Did you find her?" "Yeah," Briggs said. "She's here, safe, but she's scared, and she's got a right to be." "Put her on." Briggs extended the phone. Wren took it hesitantly, holding it like it might bite. "Wren Avery." The voice on the other end was gentle. Not soft, there was nothing soft about it. It was the gentleness of someone who understood that trust was earned, not demanded, and that the girl holding this phone had every reason in the world to hang up and run. "My name is Shay Colton." Silence. "Thank you for saving my life," Shay continued. "I know you didn't have to. I know it would have been safer to walk away. Everyone else did. 20 people stood on that bank and watched me drown, and you were the only one who moved. I won't forget that. Not ever." Wren said nothing. Couldn't find words that fit the moment. "Briggs told you about the danger," Shay said. "About Slade. That's real. But so is my promise. If you come in, if you let us protect you, we will. Whether you testify or not, whether you help us or not. You saved my life, and that makes you family. And we protect family. That's not a negotiation. That's a fact. Why should I believe you?" Wren's voice cracked on the last word, the first break in the wall she'd built around herself. People make promises. People say they'll take care of you, and then they don't look up when you walk out the door. Shay was quiet for a beat. One beat, two. Then she said, because I mobilized 150 people to search for someone whose name I didn't even know. Because I left a hospital with 3 broken ribs to ride through this city looking for you. Because family isn't something I take lightly, and once you're in, you're in. No conditions, no expiration date. Another silence, longer this time. Then Wren spoke, and her voice was different, smaller, younger, stripped of the armor she'd been wearing for 8 months. My parents died 8 months ago. A driver fleeing a trafficking bust hit their car. That's why I was homeless. That's why I ended up under that bridge. She heard Shay's breathing change on the other end. A sharp intake. A connection being made. I'm so sorry, Shay said. That isn't fair. None of this is fair. So when you ask me if I'll help you stop Slade, Wren's voice strengthened, solidified, became something harder and more certain than anything she'd said in 8 months. The answer is yes, not because I owe you, not because you're offering me safety, but because he's the same kind of monster that killed my parents. The same world that took them from me is the world he profits from. And if I can do something to stop it, I will. A pause. Then Shay's voice warm as a hearth fire, steady as bedrock. Then we stand together. Briggs will bring you in. We'll keep you safe. And when you're ready, we'll make sure Dominic Slade pays for everything he's done. 20 minutes later, Wren and Finch were in Briggs's truck. 2 angels followed on their bikes, forming a loose protective convoy that wasn't obvious enough to attract attention, but tight enough to respond to any threat within seconds. Finch sat between Wren and Briggs, clutching a small backpack that contained everything she owned: a change of clothes, a toothbrush with flattened bristles, a paperback book with the cover torn off, and a stuffed rabbit missing one ear that she hadn't let go of since she was 7. They were 2 blocks from the warehouse when Briggs saw it, a black SUV turning onto 28th Street from the Port Road, moving slowly, deliberately, the way a vehicle moves when the people inside are looking for something, looking for someone. Briggs didn't brake, didn't accelerate, didn't do anything that would draw the eye. He simply turned right at the next intersection, smooth and casual, like a man who'd always intended to go that direction. In the rearview mirror, he watched the SUV continue toward the warehouse they'd left 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes. They'd missed each other by 4 minutes. Don't turn around, Briggs said quietly. Wren, who had started to look over her shoulder, faced forward. Her hand found Finch's and held it tight. That was them, wasn't it? She asked. Yeah. 4 minutes, Wren whispered. 4 minutes, Briggs confirmed. He radioed the trailing angels. New route, back roads, no highways. They wound through residential streets and industrial parks, adding 20 minutes to the drive, but staying off every road that Slade's people might be watching. Finch pressed against Wren's side, looked up at Briggs with those 2 old eyes. Are we safe? Getting there, Briggs said. Almost. Will there be food? The question asked so simply, so practically, with the particular directness of a child who had learned that food was not a guarantee but a variable, something that existed sometimes and didn't exist other times, something you asked about the way other children asked about television or toys, broke something in Briggs's chest that he didn't know could still break. Yeah, kid, there'll be food, as much as you want. Finch nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then her eyes drifted to the side mirror, watching the motorcycles following behind them. Are they all coming because of her? She pointed at Wren. Yeah. Wipe Ayo. Because she saved someone important to them, because that's what family does. Finch considered this with the gravity of a philosopher weighing a fundamental truth. I've never had family. You do now, Briggs said. The clubhouse looked different from the passenger seat of a truck than it did from the back of a motorcycle. Larger, more institutional, like a compound rather than a hangout. Fenced perimeter cameras at the gate, a parking lot full of bikes arranged in rows that suggested organization rather than chaos. Wren felt Finch press closer to her side as they walked toward the entrance. The main room was maybe half full now, 40-50 people, all of them turning to look as the door opened. The collective gaze of 50 strangers who were all in that moment focused on her. Then a woman stepped forward from a group near the bar, tall, 6 feet, maybe a shade under, broad shoulders, moving carefully like something inside her hurt with every step. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was striking rather than pretty, strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a scar through her left eyebrow that caught the light bandages at her temple still visible beneath the hair. She carried herself with the particular authority of someone who had earned respect the hard way and wore it like armor. Shay Colton. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to see clearly, far enough to give space. Her gaze moved from Wren to Finch and back, not assessing, not calculating, but seeing. The way you look at someone when you want to understand who they are, rather than what you can get from them. Wren Avery. A statement, recognition, gratitude compressed into 2 words in the particular stillness that comes when something you've been searching for is finally standing in front of you. Yeah, I'm Shay. You saved my life. Her voice was quiet, sincere, carrying no performance, no agenda, no hidden mathematics. Just a woman standing in front of a girl and telling the truth. Wren managed to nod, didn't trust her voice. You're safe here, Shay said. Both of you. Nobody's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to make you do anything you don't want to do. She glanced at Finch, held the little girl's gaze with the same directness. That goes for you too. Then she gestured to a table in the corner. Come sit. We need to talk about what happens next. As they crossed the room, Wren noticed people nodding at her. Not smiling, these weren't smiling people, not in the traditional sense, but nodding, acknowledging. The way you acknowledge someone who has already earned something just by being who they are. They sat, Shay across from them, Briggs standing nearby, a quiet sentinel. I'm going to be direct, Shay began. You have choices to make, and I want you to make them with all the information. First, the photos, the evidence. Whether you're willing to testify against Dominic Slade. Briggs told me about the children. Wren's voice was steadier now. Something about the chair, the table, the walls, the simple architecture of safety had started to loosen the knots inside her. The ones who were rescued. 8 of them, ages 7 to 14, held in conditions, Shay paused. Not for effect, but because some things are hard to say no matter how many times you've said them. Conditions no child should ever experience. Locked rooms, no daylight, fed enough to keep them alive and not a calorie more, treated as inventory. And Slade did that. His organization, yes. We've been building a case, the Angels working with law enforcement, but it's not enough, not yet. He insulates himself, layers of intermediaries, shell companies, lawyers who are paid to create distance between him and the evidence, without direct proof connecting him to the guardrail sabotage he might walk. And if he walks, he rebuilds, new routes, new Howard warehouses, new children. And my photos connect him. Your photos prove the guardrail was sabotaged. Your testimony about when and where you took them connects the sabotage to the attempt on my life. And the attempt on my life opens the door to investigating everything else. His routes, his contacts, his finances. One thread and the whole thing unravels. Wren looked at Finch, at this 9-year-old who had told her in a crumbling warehouse an hour ago that doing the right thing was worth the risk even when the right thing was terrifying. What happens if I say yes? You work with law enforcement, give statements, eventually testify in court. It could take months. It'll be hard. Slade's lawyers will try to discredit you, your age, your living situation, your credibility. They'll try to make the jury see a homeless girl instead of a witness. Shay's voice hardened on those words. But we'll be there, every step. We'll protect you, we'll prepare you. And if we win, when we win, he goes to prison for the rest of his life. And if I say no, then we still protect you, still offer you a place here if you want it. Testifying isn't a condition of safety. You're under our protection regardless. I owe you my life, Wren. That's not a transaction with fine print. Wren was quiet for a long time. The room hummed around them, the low murmur of conversations, the clink of glasses, the creak of leather. The sounds of a family going about its business. Then she said, you should know something about my parents, about why they died. Shay waited. They were hit by a driver fleeing a trafficking bust, a stolen van running from police at 90 miles an hour. He blew through a red light and killed them because he was more worried about getting caught than about who else got hurt. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. The trafficking bus, the one the driver was running from, it was one of Slade's operations. I found out 3 months later. Read it in a police report I wasn't supposed to have access to. The room seemed to contract around them. Shay's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A connection being made. A circle closing. So when you ask me if I'll help prosecute someone who traffics children, Ren continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. The answer is yes. Not because you saved me, you haven't, not yet, and I don't need saving. But because Dominic Slade is the reason my parents are dead. Because his operation, his business, his choices created the chain of events that put a stolen van on a highway at 90 miles an hour on the night of my 18th birthday. And if I can do something, anything to make sure he never does that to another family, then that's what I'm going to do. Shay nodded slowly. She reached across the table and took Ren's bandaged hand, gently, carefully, the way you hold something that is both damaged and precious. My father was taken from his home when he was 10, Shay said quietly. Rural West Virginia, sold to a sweatshop, worked until he was 14 and escaped. The trauma followed him for the rest of his life. Nightmares, paranoia, a wound that never closed. He killed himself when I was 15 because he couldn't live with what had been done to him. She held Ren's gaze. Your parents died because of trafficking. My father died because of trafficking. And the river brought us together. She squeezed Ren's hand. That's not coincidence, that's purpose, and we're going to honor it. She turned to Briggs. Get them set up in the safe house. Full protection detail. Nobody in or out without my authorization. What about me? Finch asked. Her voice was small but firm, unignorable. Shay looked at her, really looked past the tangled hair and the dirty clothes and the too thin arms, past the survival armor, past the 9-year-old exterior, to the person inside who was watching everything and understanding more than anyone wanted her to. Ren says I can stay with her. Is that true? It's true. We'll find you both a safe place. And for you, Finch, we'll find a proper placement. A good foster family. People who actually care. No. The word came out hard. Harder than a 9-year-old's voice should be capable of producing. No foster care. I'm not going back. I've been in 4 different homes in 2 years. Every one was worse than the last. I'd rather stay on the street. Shay knelt down to Finch's eye level. Slowly, because her ribs screamed at the movement, but she didn't let the pain show. You don't let pain show in front of a child who has already seen too much pain. I hear you, she said, and I believe you. The system failed you, and I won't pretend it didn't. But I can promise you this, if you let us find a placement, I will personally make sure it's the right one. I'll check, I'll visit, I'll have people watching. And if anything goes wrong, anything at all, you come straight back to us. No questions asked. How do I know you'll keep that promise? Because I know what it's like to lose the people who are supposed to protect you, Shay said. My father died because the system that was supposed to save him didn't. I won't let that happen to you. Finch studied her face with the penetrating intensity of a child who has learned that adults lie, and that the only way to protect yourself is to get better at spotting the lies than they are at telling them. She searched Shay's eyes for the flicker, the moment of insincerity. She found none. Okay, she said finally, but if they're mean, I'm leaving. Fair enough. The safe house was a 2-bedroom apartment above an auto repair shop on the north side of Tampa. Clean, furnished, a door that locked from the inside, a refrigerator full of food. Ren stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow circle, trying to process the distance between this morning and this moment. This morning, she'd woken up in an abandoned warehouse with concrete for a mattress and a folding knife in her boot. Now she had walls, a ceiling that didn't leak, a bathroom with running water and a mirror she was afraid to look into because the person looking back might not match the person she remembered being. Finch went straight to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there staring at the contents, milk, eggs, bread, fruit, cheese, leftover containers, condiments in the door with an expression that Ren had seen before on the faces of people standing in front of something they'd been told didn't exist. You can eat whatever you want, Briggs said from the doorway. It's all for you. Finch pulled out an apple, bit into it, closed her eyes. And Ren watched a 9-year-old girl experience the taste of a fresh apple the way some people experience a sunset with total consuming, almost painful gratitude. Like it was the most important thing that had ever happened to her. Like the world had just proven for the first time in her memory that it was capable of giving instead of only taking. Briggs set a burner phone on the kitchen counter. You need anything you call. Someone will be watching the building 24/7. If Slade's people come anywhere near this address, we'll know before they reach the front door. After he left, Renan and Finch sat on the couch, side by side, neither quite believing this was real. Do you think they mean it? Finch asked. About protecting us. I think so. Why pairesto? Ren thought about it, about Shay's voice on the phone, about Briggs sitting on a broken crate in an abandoned warehouse making himself small so he wouldn't scare them, about 150 motorcycles rolling out at dawn to find a girl nobody knew, about a woman with 3 broken ribs leaving a hospital because every hour she spent in bed was an hour a homeless stranger spent in danger. Because I think they actually care, she said. I know that sounds crazy. I know we've both been around enough people who said they cared and didn't. But the way Shay talked, the way she looked at you, I don't think she's lying. Finch was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I hope you're right. That night, Ren slept in a real bed for the first time in 8 months. Sheets, a pillow, a blanket that wasn't a damaged sleeping bag held together with duct tape and determination. Finch took the second bedroom, after making Ren promise twice, once with words and once with a pinky swear that she wouldn't leave without telling her. Ren lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a building that hummed and breathed and settled around her, like something alive. Outside, she could hear the distant rumble of a motorcycle, one of the protection details circling the block, in a pattern that was both watchful and somehow comforting. 3 days ago, she'd been invisible. Homeless. Alone in the most complete way a person can be. Alone without roots, without connections, without a single human being on the planet who would notice if she simply stopped existing. Now she was a witness in an attempted murder case, under the protection of the Hells Angels, living in an apartment with running water and food and a door that locked from the inside. And somewhere across the city, a woman she'd pulled from a river was building a case that could put a monster in prison for the rest of his life. It felt like a dream, the kind you're afraid to fall asleep inside because waking up from it would be worse than never having dreamed it at all. But when sleep finally came slowly, cautiously, like an animal approaching a hand that has been extended too many times and withdrawn too often. Ren Avery didn't wake up at every sound, didn't reach for the knife in her boot, didn't lie rigid cataloging threats, calculating escape routes, measuring the distance to the nearest exit. For the first time in 8 months, she slept. Really slept. The deep, dreamless, surrendering sleep of someone who, for the first time since the worst night of her life, wasn't alone anymore. Shay arrived at the safe house the next morning at 7. Not Briggs. Not one of the other angels. Shay herself carrying a bag from the drugstore, antiseptic, clean bandages, medical tape, antibiotic ointment, and a paper bag from a bakery down the street. Let me see your hands, she said, sitting across from Ren at the kitchen table while Finch worked her way through a stack of pancakes that Briggs's wife had dropped off an hour earlier. Ren extended her hands. Shay unwrapped the dirty bandages with the careful, practiced motions of someone who had dressed wounds before. The cuts were deep, some of them would scar, but they were clean, no signs of infection. Shay cleaned them anyway. Applied ointment, wrapped them in fresh bandages with a gentleness that Ren hadn't experienced since the last time her mother had put a Band-Aid on a scraped knee. FBI's coming this afternoon, Shay said as she worked. Special Agent Claire Dunham. She'll want your statement, the photos. Am I ready for that? Nobody's ever ready, but you'll do fine. Just tell the truth. That's all they need. She finished the last bandage, held Ren's hands for a moment longer than necessary. I'll be here the whole time. You won't be alone. She came back that afternoon when Dunham arrived, stood by the window watching the street while Ren gave her statement, detailed, precise, honest. The photos were time-stamped. The faces were identifiable. Dunham listened without interruption, took notes in precise handwriting, and asked follow-up questions that were thorough without being aggressive. The 2 men in the photos, Dunham said after Ren finished. We've identified them, Marcus Webb and Tony Brashear, both known associates of Dominic Slade. Is that enough? Shay asked from her position by the window. It's a start, but Slade's insulated, layers of deniability. We need more to reach him directly. We need someone inside his organization to flip to connect him personally to the order to sabotage the guardrail and to the trafficking operation. Shay turned from the window. We can help with that. My people have been tracking Slade's routes for months. We know his distribution schedule, his pickup locations, his driver rotations. I'll give you everything we have. Dunham looked at her, assessed, decided. That would be extremely useful. On one condition, we stay in the loop. Every development, every arrest, every new piece of evidence. These are our people being threatened. This is our territory being violated. We have a right to know how the case is progressing. I can work with that, Dunham said. After the FB, I left. Shay sat with Wren while Finch watched cartoons in the other room. The sound of animated voices and exaggerated sound effects drifting through the wall like signals from a parallel universe, where the biggest problem in a 9-year-old's life was which cereal to eat for breakfast. The photos will help, Shay said. But Dunham's right, we need someone to flip. I've already pointed the FBI toward Brashear. He's the weaker link. Webb's loyal to Slade, but Brashier's in it for the money. When the money isn't worth the prison time, he'll talk. How do you know? Because I've spent 24 years reading people. It's the only skill that matters when you're running a club, knowing who'll stand and who'll fold. She looked at Wren. You're a stander, by the way, in case you were wondering. 2 weeks later, Brashear folded. The pressure worked exactly as Shay had predicted. Faced with federal charges, carrying mandatory minimums, confronted with the evidence from Wren's photos, and offered a deal that would reduce his sentence from 30 years to 12, Tony Brashear gave up everything. Locations, contacts, routes. The internal structure of Slade's organization laid out in meticulous detail by a man who had been part of it for 7 years and had kept mental records the way a crooked accountant keeps a second set of books. Then came the detail that changed everything. Dunham showed up at the safe house on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Wren had given her initial statement. Her expression was grim, her jaw set with the particular tension of someone carrying information that is going to make the world uglier before it gets better. We found the corruption, she said without preamble, standing in the living room, while Shay and Wren sat on the couch and Finch colored at the kitchen table with a box of crayons one of the angels had brought her. Someone inside local law enforcement has been protecting Slade, tipping him off about investigations, burying evidence, making cases disappear. Who? Shay asked. Her voice was level, but Wren could see her hands tighten on the arm of the couch. County Sheriff Wade Tillman. The name landed like a grenade in a quiet room. Tillman was a public figure, 23 years in law enforcement. A face on billboards during election season, always standing in front of an American flag, always shaking hands with some community leader, always projecting the image of a man who had devoted his life to keeping people safe. How certain are you? Offshore accounts in the Caymans, encrypted communications on a secondary phone, $100,000 a year for 6 years deposited in increments designed to avoid federal reporting thresholds. In exchange, Tillman gave Slade advance warning on active investigations, quashed warrants before they could be served, and made physical evidence disappear from the department's storage facility. How many cases did he bury? We're still counting. Dunham's voice was flat, professional, controlled, but Wren could hear the anger beneath it, compressed and dense like something under pressure. Preliminary estimates suggest over 40 investigations in 6 years that went nowhere because Tillman interfered. 40 investigations that should have led to arrests, prosecutions, convictions. 40 times that victims could have been found rescued, given justice. Wren felt the number settle into her stomach like a stone. 40. 40 investigations. 40 chances to find children locked in warehouses, to stop drivers from fleeing in stolen vans, to prevent the chain of events that had killed her parents and put her on the street. Those kids, she said quietly. The 8 who were rescued. They were in that warehouse longer than they should have been. Yes. Because Tillman buried the investigation that would have found them sooner. Yes. Shay stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street, at the ordinary world going about its ordinary business, at the parking lot, and the cars and the people who had no idea that the man paid to protect them had been selling their safety for $100,000 a year. So we take them both, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight, the weight of decision, of commitment, of a line being drawn that would not be crossed and could not be erased. Slade and Tillman. Together, we don't just cut the head off the snake, we pull out the roots. That's the plan, Dunham confirmed. Simultaneous arrests, no warning, no time for either of them to contact the other or destroy evidence. We're targeting dawn, day after tomorrow. I want to be there, Shay said. When you arrest Slade, Dunham started to protest, then looked at Shay at the broken ribs and the bandaged temple and the eyes that had already seen more than most people see in a lifetime and reconsidered. I'll arrange it, but you stay back. This is our operation. Understood. After Dunham left, Wren found Shay on the steps outside the apartment, sitting in the late afternoon sun, watching a cardinal hop along the chain-link fence that bordered the auto shop's parking lot. You all right? Wren asked, sitting beside her. I keep thinking about the number, Shay said. 40 investigations. 40 times someone in that department brought a case to Tillman's desk, and 40 times he looked at the evidence and decided that $100,000 was worth more than the people in those files. People like those kids. People like those kids. People like your parents. Shay turned to look at her. The van that hit them, the driver was fleeing a bust that should have happened 6 months earlier. An informant had given Tillman's department the location of Slade's warehouse in March. Tillman sat on it until September, giving Slade time to move operations. When they finally raided in September, the warehouse was empty. Slade's people scattered, and one of them stole a van and ran, right into your parents' car. Wren felt the world tilt, felt the connection close like a circuit completing, like the last piece of a puzzle falling into place with a click that resonated through her entire body. Tillman's delay, she said slowly. That's why the bust was that night. That's why the driver was running. If Tillman had acted on the informant in March, your parents might still be alive. They sat in silence for a long time. The cardinal flew away. The sun moved behind a cloud. The world kept turning the way it always does, indifferent to the revelations that break people apart and the ones that put them back together. We end this, Wren said finally. Both of them, Slade and Tillman. We end it and we make sure it never happens again. Shay nodded. Day after tomorrow. I'll be ready. Shay put her arm around Wren's shoulders carefully because of the ribs, because of the still healing hands, because of all the broken things between them that were slowly, painfully learning how to mend. Your parents would be proud of you, she said. Wren leaned into the embrace, the first time she'd let anyone hold her in 8 months. I know, she whispered on. I'm starting to be proud of me too. The arrest happened at dawn. Shay stood on a residential street in South Tampa, 2 blocks from Dominic Slade's mansion, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the thin bruised amber that comes just before the sun breaks the horizon. The air was cool for Florida mid-60s, carrying the faint salt tang of the bay in the particular stillness that settles over a city in the minutes before it wakes up. Birds were starting. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A sprinkler system clicked on 3 houses down the mechanical rhythm of ordinary life, continuing in complete ignorance of what was about to happen. FBI tactical vehicles were staged around the corner out of sight from the mansion's security cameras. 12 agents in body armor, armed with a federal warrant and the accumulated evidence of months of investigation, Wren's photographs, Brashear's testimony, financial records pulled from offshore accounts, encrypted communications decoded by analysts who'd spent weeks untangling the digital architecture of Dominic Slade's empire. Dunham stood beside Shay, speaking into a radio in clipped, efficient phrases, coordinating, confirming, making sure that the simultaneous operation happening across town, the arrest of Sheriff Wade Tillman at his home in Riverview, was on schedule, on target, synchronized to the minute. No warning, no time for a phone call, no chance for either man to alert the other or destroy evidence or call the lawyers who had spent years building walls of plausible deniability around their clients' crimes. We're a go in 60 seconds, Dunham said, lowering the radio. She glanced at Shay. You stay here, on this sidewalk, behind the perimeter. Understood. I mean it, Colton. You take 1 step past that line and I'll have you in handcuffs before Slade. Shay almost smiled. Almost. I'll behave. Dunham gave her a look that suggested she'd believe that when she saw it, then turned back to the operation. Raised her hand, counted down with her fingers. 3, 2. 1. The breach was fast, professional, overwhelming. Agents moved through the front gate in a coordinated wave, two teams, one through the main entrance, one through the service door on the east side. Shay heard the sharp, percussive bang of a breaching charge followed by shouted commands that echoed off the mansion's stucco walls like the barking of large, disciplined dogs. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes from the first breach to the moment Dominic Slade appeared in the front doorway, hands behind his back, wrists bound in steel, flanked by two agents who each had 6 inches and 50 pounds on him. His suit was wrinkled. He'd been sleeping in his clothes or hadn't slept at all. His hair, usually slicked with the meticulous vanity of a man who believed presentation was power, was disheveled. His expression was carefully controlled, the way it always was the mask he wore over the real face. The performance of composure that was supposed to communicate that none of this bothered him, that he was above it, that he'd been in difficult situations before and always found his way out. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes, as they swept the street and the vehicles and the agents and the neighbors emerging from their houses in bathrobes and confusion, had the particular quality of a man who was realizing for the first time that the walls he'd built were not as solid as he'd believed. They walked him down the driveway toward the unmarked car waiting at the curb, and that's when he saw her. Shay Colton standing on the sidewalk behind the FBI perimeter, arms crossed, weight on her back foot, watching him with the same steady, unflinching gaze she'd turned it on him in the clubhouse, the day he'd walked in and told her he wanted to use her roads to move children. Their eyes met. The distance between them was maybe 30 feet, but it felt like nothing, like they were standing across a table again, and the only thing between them was the truth about who they were and what they'd chosen. Slade's mask slipped, just for a moment, just long enough for Shay to see the hatred beneath it, raw, personal, the concentrated fury of a man who had lost and knew it and blamed everyone except himself. "You should have taken the deal," he said, quietly, almost conversationally, as if they were discussing a business arrangement that hadn't worked out rather than the destruction of an empire built on the suffering of children. Shay's smile was ice, thin and sharp and cold enough to cut. "You should have stayed out of my city." They put him in the car, closed the door, drove away, and Shay stood on the sidewalk watching the taillights disappear into the morning traffic, feeling something she hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not the hot, righteous pleasure of watching an enemy fall. Relief, the quiet, exhausted, bone-deep relief of a woman who had been fighting for months and could finally, for the first time since the river, take a full breath without wondering if it would be her last. Across town, Sheriff Wade Tillman was being arrested at the same moment. Dunham had coordinated the timing to the second. When Tillman opened his front door at 6:02 a.m., responding to what he'd been told was an emergency call from his office, he found 4 federal agents and a warrant with his name on it. The charges filled 3 pages: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, bribery, accessory to human trafficking, accessory after the fact to attempted murder. Each count a brick in a wall that his lawyers would spend months trying to tear down and never succeed. By noon, both men were in federal custody, processed, photographed, and placed in holding cells on opposite sides of the building. By evening, every news channel in Florida was leading with the story. A trafficking kingpin and a corrupt county sheriff arrested simultaneously in a coordinated FBI operation. An attempted murder investigation that had unraveled an empire. A homeless girl whose photographs had provided the thread that, when pulled, brought the whole thing down. Wren watched the coverage from the safe house apartment with Finch beside her on the couch. The little girl had found a blanket in the closet, soft blue, the kind of blanket that exists in normal homes for normal reasons, and had wrapped herself in it like a cocoon, only her face visible, her eyes moving between the television screen and Wren's face, reading the older girl's reactions, the way she'd learned to read everything carefully, constantly, as if the world were a book written in a language she was still learning. "We did it," Finch said quietly. "Not yet," Wren replied, watching footage of Slade being led into the federal courthouse, his expression a masterwork of performed indifference. "They're arrested, but the trial still has to happen. They could still get away with it." "Do you think they will?" Wren thought about Shay, about the angels, about Dunham and the evidence files and the financial records and her own photographs, time-stamped and geolocated and corroborated by the testimony of a man who had been part of Slade's operation for 7 years. She thought about 8 children pulled from a warehouse, about 40 investigations that had been buried and were now being exhumed. No, she said, I don't think they will. Finch nodded satisfied. Then she looked up at Wren with those ancient, assessing eyes. What happens to us now? I don't know. Something better than before. Promise. Wren put her arm around the blanket-wrapped bundle that was Finch. Promise, my house. 4 months passed. The case built itself the way good cases do, slowly, methodically, brick by brick. Brashear's testimony opened doors that led to other doors. Financial forensics traced money through shell companies and offshore accounts with the patience of bloodhounds following a scent. Dunham's team interviewed witnesses, gathered physical evidence, built a timeline that stretched back 6 years and encompassed 2 states and 47 individual crimes. Slade's lawyers fought every step. Motions to suppress, motions to dismiss, challenges to the admissibility of Wren's photographs, to Brashear's credibility, to the chain of custody, to the jurisdiction. They were good lawyers, expensive, experienced, creative in the way that lawyers who defend the indefensible learn to be creative. They delayed, obstructed, and objected with the mechanical persistence of machines designed to turn the wheels of justice as slowly as possible. But the evidence held. The timeline held. The witnesses held. And when the trial date was finally set, a Tuesday morning in January, 4 months after the arrest, the prosecution had assembled a case that filled 17 binders and called 43 witnesses and told a story that began with a guardrail being cut on a Florida highway and ended with an empire built on the bodies of children. Wren prepared for testimony the way she'd prepared for cross-country races in what felt like another life, with repetition, with focus, with the understanding that the only thing she could control was her own performance and that everything else was noise. AUSA. Kevin Oakes spent 3 days with her, walking through the questions, practicing the answers, teaching her the rhythm of courtroom testimony, how to pause before responding, how to address the jury without staring, how to handle the particular form of psychological warfare that cross-examination represented. Just tell the truth, Oakes said during their final prep session, sitting across from her in the conference room at the federal building. The evidence speaks for itself. Your photographs speak for themselves. You just need to verify what they show and describe what you witnessed. The defense will try to rattle you. They'll question your credibility, your memory, your circumstances. Let them. The truth doesn't change just because someone asks the question in a hostile tone. What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing? Then you correct yourself. You're not a lawyer. Nobody expects you to be perfect. They expect you to be honest. And you are. The courtroom was smaller than Wren had imagined. Not the grand mahogany-paneled theater she'd seen in movies, but an ordinary room with fluorescent lights and worn carpet in the particular institutional blankness of a space that processed human tragedy with bureaucratic efficiency. The kind of room where the worst moments of people's lives were discussed in measured tones and recorded in shorthand by a court reporter whose expression never changed. Dominic Slade sat at the defense table wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything Wren had owned in the past year combined. He looked bored, or was performing boredom, which was the same thing when you'd spent your entire adult life treating every human interaction as a transaction. His lawyer, Miranda Blackwell, was arranging documents with the crisp precision of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to do it 100 more. Wren sat in the witness waiting room with Finch beside her. The little girl had insisted on coming, and Shay had arranged it a special accommodation, a supervised waiting area, because Finch had made it clear that she was not staying home while Wren went to war. You're going to do great, Finch said with the absolute confidence of a 10-year-old who had already survived worse than a courtroom and had developed in the months since being taken in by the angels an unshakable faith in the people she'd chosen as family. What if you saved someone's life? You took pictures of bad people doing bad things. You're telling the truth. Finch squeezed her hand. That's all that matters. A bailiff appeared at the door. Wren Avery, they're ready. Wren stood. Her legs were shaking, a fine, barely visible tremor that started in her knees and radiated outward, the kind of shaking that comes not from cold, but from the body's recognition that what is about to happen matters in a way that most things don't. She looked at Finch one more time. Go get him, Ma, the girl said and smiled. The walk from the waiting room to the witness stand felt like the longest distance Wren had ever covered, and she'd run cross-country races that spanned miles. Every eye in the courtroom turned to watch her slade's cold gaze. Shay's encouraging nod from the gallery, the jury's curious assessment of this young woman, whose photographs had started a chain of events that led to this moment. She took the oath, sat down, met the prosecutor's eyes. Ms. Avery, Oakes began, can you tell the court what you witnessed on the morning of September 14th? Wren took a breath, the deepest breath she'd taken since the river. I was living under the I-275 bridge, she said. I woke up around 6:30 and saw two men on the highway above me. They were using bolt cutters to cut through the guardrail support structure. Did you know what they were doing at the time? No, I didn't understand why anyone would cut a guardrail. I just knew it looked wrong, so I took pictures with my phone. Oakes displayed the photographs on screens around the courtroom. 4 images, grainy but clear enough. Timestamp 6:47 a.m. Two men with industrial tools. Metal being cut in precise, deliberate patterns that bore no resemblance to maintenance or repair. What did you do after taking these photos? I deleted them from my recent folder to save storage space on my phone. Then I left. I went looking for food. I tried to forget about what I'd seen. She paused, felt the guilt rise in her chest the way it always did when she talked about this part. I didn't call the police. I was scared of being pulled back into the foster care system. I made the wrong choice, and I know that. When did you realize the significance of what you'd witnessed? That night, when I heard the crash, when I saw a truck go through the guardrail at the exact spot where those men had been working 12 hours earlier. When I realized someone was drowning because I hadn't made a phone call. And what did you do? I went into the water. I pulled her out. The simplicity of the statement hung in the courtroom like a held note. Oakes let it resonate. And he displayed 2 photographs on the screen, are the men you saw cutting the guardrail, Marcus Webb and Tony Brashear. Their faces filled the monitors. Wren looked at them the way you look at something you've been carrying in the dark for months and are finally setting down in the light. Yes. No further questions. Miranda Blackwell stood for cross-examination. She was good. Wren could see that immediately. The way she moved, the calculated pause before speaking, the slight tilt of her head that projected sympathetic curiosity while concealing the blade beneath it. This was a woman who dismantled witnesses for a living and enjoyed the architecture of destruction. Ms. Avery, you were homeless when you took these photos. Is that correct? Yes. Living under a bridge, no permanent address, no stable housing. That's correct. And you claim you just happened to see these men cutting a guardrail that morning. I didn't claim anything. I was there. I saw them. But how can you be certain of what you saw? Blackwell's voice was gentle, almost kind, the gentleness of a surgeon explaining why the amputation was necessary. You were in a difficult situation, homeless, presumably dealing with significant stress, poor nutrition, inadequate sleep, exposure to the elements. How reliable can your observations really be given those circumstances? Wren felt anger rise in her chest, hot, bright, clarifying. The kind of anger that doesn't cloud your thinking, but sharpens it, that burns away everything except the essential truth. Being homeless doesn't make me blind, she said, and it doesn't make me stupid. I saw 2 men cutting through a guardrail with bolt cutters at 6:47 in the morning. 7 hours later, that guardrail failed and nearly killed someone. The photos I took are timestamped, geolocated, and show exactly what I described. Those aren't my memories, Ms. Blackwell. Those are digital records. They don't get stressed. They don't lose sleep. They don't suffer from poor nutrition. They just show what happened. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Blackwell's expression tightened by a fraction of a degree. You mentioned that you didn't report what you saw to the police. That's right. I was afraid of being put back into foster care. I made a mistake. But my failure to report doesn't change what I witnessed. The photos exist whether I called the police or not. Blackwell tried several more angles, questioning the chain of custody of the phone, suggesting the timestamps could have been manipulated, implying that Wren's relationship with the Hells Angels compromised her objectivity. Wren held firm on every point, not defiant, not aggressive, just steady, honest. Immovable in the way that truth is immovable when it's been told by someone who has nothing to gain from telling it and nothing to lose. When she stepped down from the stand, she caught Shay's eye in the gallery. The older woman nodded once, a small movement, almost imperceptible, but carrying in that single gesture everything that words could not adequately contain. Pride, gratitude, the quiet acknowledgement of one woman recognizing another's strength. Shay testified on the third day. She walked to the stand with the same unhurried authority she brought to everything, the particular confidence of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and had learned to use that underestimation as a weapon. She took the oath, sat down, and looked at the jury with eyes that held nothing back. Oakes led her through the meeting with Slade, the proposal, the trafficking routes. The moment Slade had described his cargo as human and expected her to do business with him. Why did you refuse Mr. Slade's offer? Because my father was a victim of trafficking. Shay's voice was steady as a flat line and just as serious. Taken from his home in West Virginia when he was 10 years old, sold to a garment factory, worked 16-hour days in conditions that would be criminal even for an adult. He escaped when he was 14, but the damage was done. The trauma followed him for the rest of his life. The courtroom was silent, the particular silence that comes when a room full of people is listening, really listening to something that matters. When I was 15, my father ended his life because he couldn't live with what had been done to him, because the nightmares never stopped, because no amount of love or therapy or time could undo what those years had broken inside him. She paused, not for effect, for composure. When Dominic Slade walked into my clubhouse and asked me to help him move children to use my territory, my roads, my name to facilitate the same industry that destroyed my father, there was only one answer I could give. I said no. And 12 hours later, someone tried to kill me for it. The defense tried to shake her during cross-examination. Blackwell questioned her credibility, suggested she was biased, implied that the Hells Angels were a criminal organization, and that Shay's testimony was motivated by gang rivalry rather than moral conviction. Shay never wavered. Ms. Colton, isn't it true that you lead what many people would characterize as a criminal organization? I lead a motorcycle club. We ride bikes, we look out for each other, we protect our community. Come now, the Hells Angels have a well-documented reputation for loyalty. Shay interrupted, not rudely, calmly, with the measured precision of someone who had anticipated this question and prepared an answer that left no room for misinterpretation. For protecting our own, for standing up to people who hurt children, which is exactly what I did when I refused to help Mr. Slade traffic kids. If that makes me a criminal in your eyes, Ms. Blackwell, then I'll wear that label proudly. The rescued children testified through closed-circuit video, faces hidden, voices small but clear, carrying across the courtroom with the particular weight that children's voices carry when they are describing things that should never have happened to them. They described the warehouse, the locked doors, the darkness, the fear that lived in every hour of every day that became the air they breathed and the water they drank and the surface they slept on. They described the men who kept them. Not with anger, not yet, because anger is a luxury that comes later, after safety, after distance, after the realization that what happened to you was wrong and that wrongness deserves a response. The last child to testify was 9 years old, a girl. Her name was also Wren. A coincidence that carried a weight the courtroom could feel that connected two lives separated by circumstance, but joined by the particular cruelty of a world that allows children to be treated as commodities. Did anyone come for you? Oakes asked gently. Yes. The girl's voice was small but clear through the speakers. The FBI. They broke down the doors and carried us out. Do you know why they found you when they did? The girl nodded. Because someone took pictures of bad people doing bad things, and because someone else wouldn't stop fighting until they found us. She looked toward the camera, toward the courtroom, toward the gallery, toward the place where she seemed to know somehow that the woman who hadn't stopped fighting was sitting. She made them keep looking, and they did. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Wren spent that time in a conference room on the third floor of the federal courthouse. Finch was beside her, working through a book of crossword puzzles that one of the court officers had given her. Shay sat by the window watching the street below her stillness, the kind that comes not from calm, but from the disciplined containment of every emotion she couldn't afford to feel until this was over. Briggs stood by the door, arms crossed, a sentinel who had been standing watch in one form or another for 30 years. Nobody talked much. There was nothing to say that the waiting didn't say better. 11 hours of silence and crossword puzzles and cold coffee and the particular torture of knowing that the most important decision of your life is being made in a room you're not allowed to enter by 12 people you've never met. When the bailiff finally appeared in the doorway and said, "They're coming on," Wren's heart began beating so hard she could hear it in her ears, could feel it in her fingertips, could sense it in the tremor that ran through her body like a current looking for ground. They filed back into the courtroom. Wren sat in the gallery between Shay and Finch, the little girl's hand in hers gripping with a strength that seemed impossible for someone her size. The jury filed in, 12 faces, 12 expressions that Wren tried to read the way she'd learned to read everything in the past year, quickly, carefully looking for the tells that would reveal the truth before the words arrived. None of them looked at Slade. The foreperson stood, a woman in her 50s, gray-haired, wearing glasses that caught the courtroom's fluorescent light. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find guilty? The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, ripples spreading outward, touching everything. On the charge of human trafficking of minors, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to traffic persons across state lines, guilty. Guilty on all 17 counts, each one a door closing, each one a wall going up between Dominic Slade and the world he had terrorized for years. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum the law allowed and not one day more than justice demanded. Sheriff Wade Tillman tried separately 2 weeks later in a proceeding that took 4 days and produced a verdict in 6 hours, received 25 years in federal prison. 12 of Slade's associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. The network was dismantled. The routes were closed. The warehouses were emptied and condemned, and in one case demolished, the concrete and rebar reduced to rubble by machines that didn't know or care what had happened inside those walls. Outside the courthouse on the day of Slade's verdict, reporters surrounded them. Cameras, microphones, the machinery of public attention grinding away at a story it would process, and package, and deliver to a million screens before sundown. "How do you feel about the verdict?" someone asked. Shay's answer was simple. Justice was served. Children are safer today than they were yesterday. That's what matters. "Is it true you mobilized your entire organization to find a homeless witness?" "I mobilized my family to find someone who saved my life. There's a difference, and she's not a witness. She's my daughter in every way that counts." "What's next for you?" Shay looked at where Wren stood with Finch, both of them staying out of camera range, both of them watching her with expressions that mixed relief with something deeper, the tentative, careful beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. "Next," Shay said, turning back to the cameras, "we make sure these kids have futures worth living, that they never have to feel invisible again, that the system that failed them once doesn't get a second chance to fail." 6 months after the trial, Wren Avery celebrated her 19th birthday. She'd almost forgotten. Birthdays hadn't meant much when she was homeless, just another day to survive, marked not by cake or candles, but by the simple fact that she'd made it through another 24 hours without being robbed or assaulted or swept up by police and processed back into a system that had already proven it didn't know what to do with her. But Shay remembered. She showed up at the auto shop where Wren now worked full-time, learning mechanics from an angel named Briggs, who had the patience of a man who'd been teaching people to fix things for 30 years. Wren had taken to it with the same intensity she'd once brought to cross-country, the same focus, the same determination, the same quiet satisfaction of mastering something difficult and knowing that the mastery was earned. Shay walked in with a small group, Briggs, Diesel, 3 other angels who had become over the past months the closest thing Wren had to aunts and uncles. They were carrying nothing. No gifts, no balloons, no cake, just themselves. "We're closing early today," Shay announced. Wren looked up from the engine she'd been rebuilding. Grease on her hands, a smudge on her cheek, her hair pulled back with a rubber band because she kept forgetting to buy real hair ties. "Why? Because you've earned something." Shay pulled a patch from her jacket pocket, small, embroidered. The Hell's Angels insignia, the winged skull. The familiar design that had meant 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people with one word stitched beneath it in clean, simple lettering. Prospect. You're not full patch, Shay said. That takes years of proving yourself. But you're family, and family gets recognized. Wren stared at the patch, at this small piece of embroidered fabric that represented something she hadn't had in over a year belonging. A place, a name on a roster, people who would look up when she walked through a door. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep being who you are. Keep showing up. Keep doing the work. Then Shay handed her an envelope. Plain, white, unremarkable. This came for you. Inside was a letter from Florida State University. Official letterhead, formal language. But the message was simple. Her deferred acceptance had been reinstated. They wanted her for the next incoming class. Full scholarship just as before. The door she'd thought had closed forever was open again. I can't afford, Wren started. The scholarship covers tuition, Shay interrupted. And the Angels have a fund for family pursuing education. Room, board, books, living expenses. I set it up last month. It's yours if you want it. Wren looked from the letter to the patch to Shay's steady gaze. At the woman who had taken a debt of gratitude and turned it into something so much larger, a family, a purpose, a future that stretched out ahead of her like a road she hadn't known existed. I want both, she said. School and this, I don't want to choose. You don't have to, we'll make it work. Wren started at Florida State that fall, studied social work because she'd seen what happened when the system worked and when it didn't, and she wanted to be on the side that made it work. Maintained a 3.7 GPA while commuting to the shop on weekends, turning wrenches and changing oil, and learning from Briggs and Diesel and the others, the particular kind of knowledge that doesn't come from textbooks, but from doing things with your hands alongside people who care about the quality of the work. Finch was placed with a foster family that Shay had personally vetted. The Johnsons, a couple in their 40s, no biological children, both educators, both possessed of the specific and rare quality of actually wanting to be foster parents, rather than simply wanting the stipend that came with it. Shay visited every 2 weeks, checked in, asked questions, made sure that what had been promised was being delivered. The Johnsons were different. They remembered Finch's birthday. They asked about her day and actually listened to the answers. They didn't make her eat in her room when company came over. They didn't talk about her in the third person when she was standing right there. Slowly, carefully, with the caution of a wild animal approaching an outstretched hand, Finch began to believe that maybe not all adults were terrible. Maybe some of them meant what they said. Maybe some promises were kept. She visited Wren every weekend, helped at the shop, stayed close to the only people who had fought for her when nobody else would. 3 years passed. Wren graduated with her bachelor's degree, started working toward a master's in social work, while helping Briggs run the shop and mentoring other at-risk youth who came through the Angels network, kids who reminded her of herself, of Finch, of every invisible person she'd ever been and every invisible person she'd ever walked past without seeing. She was 21 years old. She had an apartment she paid for herself, a motorcycle in the parking lot, a gift from the Angels when she'd graduated, a Sportster with a custom paint job that Diesel had done himself midnight blue with a single silver sparrow on the tank. She had a life built on choices rather than survival, on purpose rather than panic. On a rainy Tuesday evening, driving back from a speaking engagement at a community college where she'd stood in front of 100 at-risk students and told them her story, all of it, holding nothing back, Wren saw the accident. A sedan hydroplaning on I-275, spinning out of control in the rain tires, breaking loose from the pavement, with the sickening, almost casual ease that happens when physics overrules intention. The car hit the guardrail, the reinforced guardrail, installed after Shay's crash, built to new safety standards that had been implemented because of what had happened on this exact stretch of highway 3 years ago. But the impact was severe enough to flip the car anyway. It rolled twice, shedding glass and plastic and pieces of itself across the wet asphalt, and came to rest on its roof in the shallow water at the river's edge. The same river, almost the same spot, the place where everything had changed. Wren pulled over, didn't think, didn't calculate the risk, Didn't stand on the shoulder and pull out her phone and film it the way 20 people had done 3 years ago, while a woman drowned 30 feet below them. She ran. By the time she reached the car, water was seeping through broken windows. She could see a man unconscious in the driver's seat, a woman struggling with her seatbelt, and in the back, strapped into a booster seat, face red, voice raw from screaming a child. 7 years old, terrified, calling for parents who couldn't answer. Ren's hands remembered what to do, how to force open a jammed door. She had scars on her palms that remembered. How to unbuckle a seatbelt with shaking fingers, and the particular calm that comes from having done impossible things before and survived them. How to pull people free of twisted metal while the water rises and the clock ticks and the body screams at you to stop, to save yourself to leave. She got all three out. The woman first because she was conscious and could help when she was free. Then the child passed from Ren's arms to the mother's small hands, gripping Ren's jacket and not wanting to let go. Finally, the man, heavier, unconscious, dead weight, that she dragged through the window and across the gravel, with muscles that burned and legs that shook in a determination that had been forged in a river 3 years ago and had never cooled. The woman grabbed her hand as paramedics arrived, sirens cutting through the rain. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you. You saved us." "Just doing what someone once did for me," Ren said. A news crew materialized. Camera, microphone, reporter advancing with the particular eagerness of someone who recognizes a story when they see one. "Can you tell us what happened?" "A family's car flipped. They needed help. I helped." "But you risked your life." "Someone once taught me something," Ren said, looking at the camera, looking through it, speaking not to the reporter or the viewers, but to one person, one woman, the woman who had changed everything. "She taught me that we have a responsibility to take care of each other, especially when it's hard, especially when it's scary, especially when everyone else is just standing there watching. Her name is Shay Colton, and she showed me that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up anyway." The story ran on every local channel that night. By morning, it had spread across social media with the particular velocity that attaches to stories of hope in a world that is hungry for them. By afternoon, national outlets were running it. Former homeless teen saves family from overturned car at the same river where her own life was saved 3 years earlier. Shay called that evening. Ren was in her apartment, sitting on her couch eating leftover Chinese food and watching the coverage on mute because hearing her own voice played back to her from a television was an experience she wasn't sure she'd ever get used to. "Saw the news," Shay said. "Couldn't stay away from that river, apparently." "Apparently not." A pause, the kind of pause that carries weight. "Must run in the family." Ren smiled. "Must." "I'm proud of you," Shay said. "Not because you pulled those people out. You would have done that regardless. That's who you are. I'm proud because you've become exactly who I hoped you'd be when we found you in that warehouse." "What's that?" "Someone who pays it forward. Someone who takes what was given to her and multiplies it. Someone who doesn't just survive, but shows other people how to do more than survive." Ren thought about the last 3 years, about the kids she'd mentored at the shop, about the homeless youth she'd connected with shelters and job programs, and the particular fundamental resource of knowing that someone gave a damn whether they lived or died, about the life she'd built from nothing, not alone, never alone, but with her own hands and her own choices, and the foundation that Shay and the angels had given her. "I had a good teacher," she said. "We taught each other," Shay corrected. "That's how family works." 1 year later, Ren stood in front of a community center packed with 200 people. She was 22. She had her master's degree. She ran a program she'd founded called the River Project, providing job training, housing assistance, and mentorship to homeless youth across Tampa. The name was Shay's suggestion. The program was Ren's design. The funding came from a combination of grants, donations, and the Angels Network, which turned out to be remarkably effective at convincing local businesses that investing in homeless kids was good for the community and good for the soul. Shay sat in the front row, watching with the quiet pride of a woman who had planted a seed and was now sitting in the shade of the tree. Finch 13, now thriving in her foster placement, carrying a report card in her backpack that she showed to everyone whether they asked to see it or not, sat beside her. 4 years ago, Ren said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the room with the particular authority of someone who has earned every word she speaks. I was homeless, invisible, forgotten by a world that had decided I didn't matter. I saved someone's life and I thought that was the end of the story. Just one moment, one choice, one night in a river that didn't change anything. She paused. The room was silent in the way that rooms become silent when something true is being said. But it wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because Shay Colton didn't just say thank you and move on. She decided that if one homeless kid deserved to be saved, then all of them did. She found me. She protected me. She gave me a family when I had none. And then she helped me build something this. She gestured to the room, to the River Project banner above the stage, to the faces looking up at her, to make sure that no kid ever has to feel as invisible as I did. Her voice strengthened, drawing power from the room, from the faces, from the years of work that had led to this moment. The River Project has helped 73 young people find housing and employment in the past year. 73 people who were sleeping under bridges and in shelters and in abandoned warehouses. 73 people who thought nobody cared. We showed them what Shay showed me, that they matter, that they have value, that someone sees them. The applause was thunderous, not polite, not obligatory, the kind of applause that comes from people who have been moved, who have heard something that resonated in a place they didn't know they had, who are clapping, not because the speech was good, but because the truth behind it was undeniable. After the event, as people filtered out into the evening, Shay and Ren stood outside the community center. The air was warm, Florida warm, carrying the scent of jasmine from the planter boxes someone had installed along the sidewalk. The river was visible in the distance, a dark ribbon reflecting city lights, looking peaceful from here, looking like just water. You did good, Shay said. We did good, Ren corrected. A young woman approached them, early 20s, nervous smile, the particular mix of gratitude and vulnerability that comes from being helped when you'd given up on being helped. Excuse me, I'm Maya. I've been staying at the River Project shelter for 3 months. I just got hired today, full-time, benefits, everything. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with the particular light that comes when someone who has been in the dark for a long time steps into sunlight. I wanted to say thank you for caring, for fighting for people like me, for not giving up. After Maya left, Shay turned to Ren. Remember what I told you that night in the safe house when you couldn't sleep? You said paying it forward was the only way to make sense of the things that happened to us. You're doing it better than I ever could. Shay's voice was quiet, not emotional. She wasn't the kind of woman who displayed emotion the way most people did, but warm. Warm in the way that a banked fire is warm, steady, lasting the kind of heat that doesn't flare and die, but persists through the longest nights. You took pain and turned it into purpose, took tragedy and built something beautiful from the wreckage. I learned from the best. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, watching the river in the distance, the river that had tried to take both their lives and had instead given them each other. The river tried to kill us both, Shay said finally, and instead it gave us this. She gestured to the community center, to the River Project sign above the door, to the lives being rebuilt inside, to Maya walking away with a new job in a future she hadn't believed in 3 months ago. I used to think strength meant never needing help, Shay continued, never showing weakness, handling everything alone because asking for help meant you weren't strong enough. But you taught me something different. You taught me that real strength is knowing when to accept help, when to build something together instead of trying to stand alone. Ren nodded. And you taught me that being saved isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. What you do with that second chance, who you become, who you help, what you build, that's what matters. Shay's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled. Briggs says there's a chapter meeting tonight. You coming? Always. They walked to their motorcycles parked side by side in the community center lot. Ren's Sportster, midnight blue Silver Sparrow on the tank. Shay's bike, the same machine she'd ridden for over a decade, scarred and scratched and rebuilt more than once, carrying the history of every mile in its frame. They mounted up, started the engines. The familiar rumble filled the night, 2 engines joining into a single sound that was greater than either one alone. Ren thought about the journey, about the girl who had lost everything and chosen to save a stranger anyway, not out of courage but out of guilt, and guilt had been enough. About the woman who had turned a debt of gratitude into a family, a purpose, a legacy that would outlast them both. About how the worst night of her life had led through paths she never could have predicted to the best version of herself. The river was behind them now, just water, just the place where two lives had collided in the dark and changed everything, where a drowning woman and a homeless girl had become mother and daughter in every way that mattered, where survival had become purpose, where one act of desperate, guilt-driven courage had created a ripple that saved dozens of other lives. They rode towards the clubhouse, engines echoing through the streets, heading home to the family that had saved them both. And in their wake, 73 lives rebuilt, 8 children rescued from darkness, one empire destroyed, a corrupt sheriff behind bars, a program that would help hundreds more in the years to come. And the proof living, breathing, undeniable of what Ren Avery had known all along, even when she'd had nothing, even when she'd been invisible, even when the world had thrown her away and forgotten she existed. That one person can make a difference. That heroism isn't about fearlessness, it's about showing up when you're terrified. That the people society overlooks the ones sleeping under bridges and eating from dumpsters and carrying everything they own in a backpack sometimes have the biggest hearts and the deepest courage. And that when you pull someone from the water, when you show them they matter, when you give them family and purpose and the stubborn, unreasonable, world-changing gift of hope, they don't just survive. They become the person who dives in to save the next soul going under. The cycle continues, the river keeps flowing, and the people who care enough to jump in keep changing the world one rescue at a time.